Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The fog had settled over Harrowstone Farm like an ancient shroud, clinging to the weathered barns and crumbling fences. Evelyn Holt stood at the edge of the property, staring into the expanse of grey that stretched out before her. The farm, once a thriving place of life and warmth, now felt more like a forgotten relic of another time. The trees around the property loomed like spectral sentinels, their branches twisting and groaning in the damp air. A faint, sweet scent of lavender clung to the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the rain-soaked soil beneath her boots. It was the smell of memory, of Gabriel. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her brother had been dead for nearly a year now, but the pain of his loss still felt fresh, raw, as though the wound in her chest would never heal. The world had moved on. Her father had distanced himself into his grief, and the town had begun to forget the tragic story of the Holt family. But Evelyn couldn't move on. Not yet. Not until she found it. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to focus. The harvest bloom. Her grandfather had spoken of it, of a plant with powers that could alter life itself. The last time the plant had bloomed was over 100 years ago, during a time of great loss for the Holt family. And now, Evelyn believed it could bring Gabriel back. She had read every journal, every diary, every faded scrap of paper she could find in the old farmhouse. There were mentions of the plant's healing properties, its ability to reverse death itself. But the cost was always left unsaid. Her fingers brushed against the withered lavender flower she had carried with her, kept in a small wooden box ever since Gabriel's funeral. The petals, once vibrant and full of life, were now curled and dried, a physical symbol of her brother's death. But it was also a symbol of her resolve. Evelyn had been holding on to this flower, keeping it close, hoping that somehow it might guide her toward the answers she so desperately sought. Her footsteps crunched in the damp grass as she made her way toward the barn, the scent of lavender growing stronger with every step. It seemed to follow her, whispering memories of the past, memories of her last moments with Gabriel. She could almost hear his voice in her mind, faint and distant, like the echo of a song she couldn't quite remember. She had tried to forget the night he died, but every step she took toward the harvest bloom only seemed to pull her deeper into that painful memory. Gabriel had been sick, a rare fever that none of the doctors could cure. Evelyn had tried everything, every remedy, every herbal concoction she could find, but it was too late. Her brother had slipped away in the night, and Evelyn had been there, holding his hand, telling him that everything would be okay, when she knew it wouldn't be. That guilt had eaten away at her, driven her to the brink of madness. And now, standing here at the edge of the farm, she was sure that the harvest bloom held the answer. The barn doors creaked open as Evelyn stepped inside, the stale air heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. Dust floated in the dim light, casting long shadows across the room. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small journal she had found buried in the attic, her grandfather's journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words, his words, were still clear. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling with anticipation, until she found the entry she had been searching for. The ritual. The instructions were vague, written in hurried, cryptic lines, but they spoke of a plant that could alter the very fabric of life and death. Her grandfather had known about the harvest bloom, but had never completed the ritual himself. There was a warning. Those who seek its power must be prepared to sacrifice something precious, for the bloom will take what it desires. A price, always. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. The words seemed to vibrate in her head, mixing with the sound of her breathing. She turned back to the withered lavender in her hand. What had she sacrificed? Was it enough? As she stood in the barn, the distant hum of the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own heartbeat. And then, there it was again, the scent of lavender, stronger now, as though it were coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Evelyn's head snapped up, her pulse quickening. The lavender in her hand shifted, its darkened petals curling and opening as if breathing. She took a step back, heart racing, but the flower remained still, its transformation both a comfort and a warning. The harvest bloom was calling to her, and there was no turning back. A noise came from behind her, and Evelyn whipped around, her breath caught in her throat. She was alone. Just the barn, the smell of lavender, and the growing weight of her decision. The harvest bloom was waiting. The sun had barely risen when Evelyn made her way into town to meet Harold Briggs, the local historian. Harrowstone's streets were quiet this morning, the buildings appearing as if frozen in time. The mist still clung to the town like a soft, ghostly veil, wrapping itself around the corners of the old, faded houses. Evelyn had always felt that the town was stuck between two worlds, one that lived in the present and one that was still trapped in the past. The people here, her neighbors, spoke of her family in hushed tones, as if discussing the long-dead past would somehow bring it all back. Harold's house, a rambling structure on the edge of town, was as cluttered as his mind. Shelves were filled with books and old papers, while the scent of mothballs and ink lingered in the air. Evelyn stepped inside, her boots clicking softly against the worn wooden floorboards. Harold, an aging man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, sat hunched over an open book at his desk. He glanced up as she entered, his expression softening when he saw her. "Evelyn, it's good to see you," Harold said, his voice gruff but warm. "But I'm not sure how much I can help. The Holt family has been gone from this town for so long. There are things best left untouched." Evelyn hesitated. She had heard the rumors of the farm, of the tragic loss, and of the darkness. That seemed to hang over the Holt family like a curse. But Harold was the one person in town who might know the truth. The secrets were buried, hidden in old books and forgotten stories, but she had to know. "I need to understand more about the harvest bloom," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. "I found something in my grandfather's journals. I think it has to do with the plant." Harold sighed, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "That damn plant," he muttered under his breath. "I thought we'd buried that story long ago." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What do you know about it? The bloom? Why is it so important?" Harold leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "Well, you're not the first to come looking for answers, Evelyn. The Holt family has always had a connection to that damned plant and its power. Well, it's been rumored to do things no one should meddle with." His voice dropped lower, his eyes darting nervously toward the window, as if expecting someone to overhear. "Your grandfather, he was obsessed with it, you know. He believed it could bring back the dead." Evelyn's heart stopped. She leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. He really thought that." "Thought it?" Harold echoed, his voice growing more somber. He was convinced. "And your family, Evelyn, your family never really recovered. The bloom may have healed people, but it took things from them. People died in strange ways, and the family name, it was cursed." The air between them thickened. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't move, as though the weight of Harold's words had wrapped around her like chains. Her grandfather had been obsessed with the plant. She had known that much. But hearing the curse that followed, it shook her to her core. "You don't understand," Evelyn said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I can bring him back. Gabriel, I can bring him back. The bloom is the answer. My grandfather must have known something that could—" Harold held, upper hand cutting her off. "Evelyn, listen to me. There's no such thing as bringing someone back. You can't just undo death." His voice was harsh now, tinged with something darker, something that made Evelyn feel like a child again. "I don't know what your grandfather thought he could do, but the plant, whatever power it had, it's not a cure. It's not a gift. It's a curse." Evelyn recoiled from his words. "A curse? How can you say that? It could save him. It could save everyone." Harold shook his head. "You're not seeing the bigger picture, Evelyn. You're looking at this like it's some sort of miracle." "But the truth is, the harvest bloom didn't just heal, it took." "It always took. No one could control it, not even your grandfather. And I'll tell you this, he paid the price for it. Your family paid the price. Gabriel's death, it's part of that price." Evelyn's thoughts swirled, and the room seemed to close in on her. Was Harold right? Was her desperation clouding her judgment? She felt the pull of the lavender flower in her pocket, a constant reminder of the past, of her brother. "I need to see it," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper. Her resolve hardening. "I need to see the plant for myself. Where did it come from? How can I find it?" Harold hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "There are places in this town where the old stories still linger, places no one talks about. But if you're truly determined, you might find someone who knows where it's hidden." He paused, studying her face as if trying to read her mind. "But I warn you, Evelyn," he continued softly, "be careful. You're playing with something you don't understand. There's a reason the harvest bloom was lost to time. And I don't think it's a coincidence you're looking for it now." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she nodded. She had already made her decision. There was no turning back now. The lavender flower in her pocket shifted, and the scent filled the room once again, a constant reminder that the bloom was waiting. The bloom would answer her. With a final glance at Harold, Evelyn turned toward the door, her mind already racing with the possibility of what she might find. There was a dark history behind the plant, yes, but that history was intertwined with her own family's fate, and it was time she learned the truth. As she stepped out into the cold morning air, the mist seemed to swallow her, pulling her deeper into the past. The lavender scent lingered, and the world felt smaller, as though the harvest bloom was already pulling her into its orbit. The next morning, Evelyn found herself standing in the overgrown garden behind Harrowstone Farm, the place she hadn't dared to visit since her childhood. It was a part of the property that had been abandoned long ago, left to wither under layers of neglect. The garden was supposed to be where the harvest bloom had once flourished, a place that had been lovingly tended by her grandmother before the curse had taken root. But over the years, the land had grown wild, consumed by thorny vines, wildflowers, and creeping moss. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the oppressive weight of history hanging in the damp mist. Her grandfather's journals had been clear. This was the site of the bloom's first and last known appearance, more than a century ago. But the path that led to the garden had long since been swallowed by wild growth. The soil was uneven, and the trees surrounding the space seemed to lean inward, their branches like skeletal arms stretching across the sky, blocking the sunlight. Evelyn hesitated at the edge of the clearing, the chill of the morning air sinking deep into her bones. She had grown up hearing stories about this place, the strange, whispering wind that was said to carry the voices of the dead, the way the flowers in the garden had once bloomed in such vibrant colors that they seemed to hum with an energy of their own. Her family had kept away, fearful of what might stir in the soil. But now, Standing at the threshold, Evelyn could feel the pull of it, the same pull she had felt when she'd first held the withered lavender flower in her hand. The air felt charged here, as if something ancient was waiting for her to find it. She stepped forward, her boots crunching against the fallen leaves. The air grew colder as she walked deeper into the heart of the garden. Her breath hung in the air, a fleeting mist, as the ground became slick with moisture. A few twisted vines scraped against her legs, but she didn't flinch. She had made her decision. She was here to find the harvest bloom. The garden was dense with tangled underbrush, but Evelyn pushed through, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a nagging sensation, a whisper at the back of her mind, telling her to turn back, that some things were better left forgotten. But she couldn't stop now, not when the bloom was so close. And then she saw it, a single flower, standing tall in the center of the garden, bathed in the dim light that filtered through the branches overhead. At first, Evelyn thought it was a trick of her mind, the result of her growing obsession, but as she stepped closer, the flower came into sharper focus. It was a lavender blossom, unnaturally vibrant, its petals a dark shade of purple, almost black at the tips, with veins of gold running through the edges. The air around it seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't place, an energy that seemed to vibrate in the very air she breathed. She knelt beside it, her heart thudding in her chest. The lavender scent that filled her senses was no longer comforting. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. The flower seemed to pulse, alive in a way that no plant should be. The ground beneath it was disturbed as if it had been forcibly uprooted. The soil around the base of the flower appeared almost scorched, the earth dark and cracked, as though the plant was drawing something from the earth itself. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the flower, the scent of lavender sharp and cloying, making her head swim. As her fingers brushed the petals, the world around her seemed to shift. The wind picked up suddenly, a violent gust that made the leaves dance and swirl in the air. The sound of something breaking, snapping like the cracking of wood, echoed from somewhere deep in the garden. The plant's hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath her. For a moment, Evelyn was paralyzed, her hand still hovering above the bloom. She could hear something now, something other than the wind, voices low and distorted, as though they were speaking from far away, or perhaps from deep within the earth itself. She blinked, but the sound didn't fade. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is that you?" But the answer that came wasn't her brother's voice. It was a hollow, rasping sound, like something struggling to breathe, something caught between life and death. Her skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke out across her brow. The flower quivered again, its petals opening wider, as though in response to her touch. Evelyn recoiled, her heart racing as the air around her thickened. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, but she couldn't understand them. The voices were overlapping, becoming a cacophony of distant echoes, their words blending into one overwhelming, incomprehensible noise. Suddenly, a figure appeared in her peripheral vision, flickering at the edge of her vision like a mirage. Evelyn whipped her head toward it, but there was nothing there. The garden was still silent again. The flower's hum had stopped, and the only sound now was her own breath, shallow and fast. Shaken, Evelyn pulled her hand back, her heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't explain what had just happened. The voices, the visions, they felt real, too real. But there was no one here. There was only the plant, standing alone in the center of the garden, its petals now still, as though nothing had happened. As she backed away, a sense of dread settled over her like a heavy cloak. The garden felt darker now, the shadows lengthening, creeping toward her. The scent of lavender lingered, choking, and the air seemed colder than before. Evelyn's mind raced. her thoughts tumbling over each other. What had she just witnessed? Had it been a vision, a hallucination brought on by her obsession, or was it something more? Evelyn turned to leave, her legs trembling beneath her as she made her way back to the edge of the garden. But just before she stepped out of the clearing, she glanced back once more at the flower. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something flicker within its depths, something watching her, something that wasn't human. The sensation sent a jolt of ice through her spine. But when she blinked, the moment passed, and the garden was as silent and still as ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that the bloom had somehow acknowledged her, that it had reacted to her, in a way that felt far too intentional. Something was awakening in the garden, something that had been waiting for her. And now, Evelyn knew that the harvest bloom had found her. Evelyn's hands trembled as she left the garden, her feet moving almost instinctively as she retreated from the eerie, oppressive silence that had settled in the air. The whispers had faded, leaving only a lingering sense of unease in their wake. The lavender scent still clung to her skin, an unshakable reminder of the unnatural presence she had just encountered. Her mind raced with questions. Had she truly seen something in the depths of the flower, or had the power of her obsession clouded her judgment? Was it possible that the harvest bloom itself had responded to her? Or was it simply the manifestation of grief, her broken heart warping the world around her? She had to know more. Evelyn's feet moved with determination, driven by a gnawing need to understand the force that had drawn her here. There was one more place to investigate, one final thread she had yet to pull on in her search for answers. The cellar, her grandfather, had spoken little about it in his journals, but there were hints, cryptic, fleeting remarks that suggested a hidden room below the farmhouse, a space where knowledge had been hidden, where rituals had been performed. It was said to be where the family's darkest secrets were buried, locked away from the world. And Evelyn knew deep down that if she could uncover what lay there, it might be the final piece of the puzzle. But the fear in her chest grew with each step toward the farmhouse. It was one thing to search the garden to try to find the plant itself, but the cellar was different. There, beneath the house, was where everything began. There, beneath her feet, was where the truth of the bloom and her family's curse was hidden. The farmhouse loomed before her as she approached, its wooden frame sagging under the weight of time. The walls had faded from their original warmth, now weathered by years of neglect. There was something unsettling about the house's emptiness, something cold about the air that clung to it. The doors creaked open when she pushed against them, the wood groaning in protest, as though the house itself was reluctant to allow her entry. Inside, the atmosphere was stale, heavy with dust and the scent of mildew. The silence was suffocating. Evelyn made her way through the long forgotten rooms, each one filled with remnants of the past, old photographs, cracked furniture, and the faint impression of a life once lived here. The staircase creaked under her weight as she descended to the basement. Her breath was shallow, her pulse racing as she reached the final step. The cellar door loomed before her, its wood chipped and scarred, its handle cold under her fingers. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what she might uncover, but there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, she swung the door open. The air inside the cellar was thick and stale, the dust motes floating in the faint beams of sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the walls. The room smelled of earth and something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The stone walls were lined with shelves of old jars and bottles, their contents long dried and forgotten. The room was cluttered, chaotic, as if it had been abandoned in haste. But as Evelyn stepped further inside, her eyes were drawn to the far corner where an old chest sat, its surface scratched and worn with age. Her heartbeat quickened. It was there, hidden among the clutter, a chest that her grandfather had mentioned in passing, one that had been sealed tight for decades. The key to unlocking the truth, she was certain. Her hands shook as she approached it, each step heavier than the last. The chest's dark wood was covered in dust, but there was something about its presence, that made her pulse race. She knelt down in front of it, her fingers brushing the surface. There was no lock, no latch, just a simple iron clasp that seemed to have been rusted shut by time. With a deep breath, Evelyn forced the clasp open, the metal groaning. As it gave way, the chest opened with a heavy creak, revealing a bundle of old papers wrapped in a yellowed cloth. At the top, a faded letter caught her attention, its script elegant but worn, as if it had been handled countless times. She unfolded it carefully, the paper crinkling under her touch. The letter was addressed to her grandfather, written in the same handwriting that had filled the pages of the journals she had found. It read, "The bloom grows only where the earth is most torn, where the soul has been split and the fabric of life has been ruptured. It is not a gift, it is a pact. The price of resurrection is not just a soul, but all that one is. Do not seek it. Do not seek what has been lost." Evelyn's stomach turned as she read the words. They were a warning, a final plea to leave the bloom alone. But the message came too late. She was already beyond the point of no return. Her fingers gripped the letter tighter as she read on. It spoke of the harvest bloom's power, its ability to heal, to bring the dead back. But it also warned of the terrible cost. The soul of the one who sought it would be taken in exchange for the return of another. The more she read, the clearer the truth became. This was not just a plant. It was a force, an ancient power, one that knew no mercy. Her heart pounded as she continued to search through the chest, pulling out more papers, more journals, all describing failed attempts to control the bloom's power. Her grandfather's writings, once full of hope and determination, now seemed like desperate cries from a man who had realized too late the price he had paid for tampering with forces beyond his comprehension. There were drawings of the bloom, its petals stretching outward like claws, and notes about rituals and incantations, each more dangerous than the last. Evelyn's hands trembled as she realized the full extent of what her grandfather had tried to achieve. He hadn't just sought the bloom to save Gabriel. He had tried to resurrect a long-dead family member, someone he had failed to save in the past. But in doing so, he had invited something far darker into their lives. Suddenly, she felt a cold draft sweep through the cellar, as if the room itself had exhaled a breath it had been holding. The papers in her hands rustled, and the faintest whisper of voices drifted through the air. Her eyes darted around the room, and she swore she saw a shadow move in the corner of the cellar. Her pulse quickened, and she snapped the papers shut, shoving them back into the chest. The darkness had followed her down here. She slammed the chest shut with a finality that reverberated in her bones, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cellar had grown colder, the air more oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in around her. She could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, as though the very foundation of Harrowstone was aware of her presence, aware of her trespass into the depths of its secrets. The whispering had stopped, but something else had taken its place, a low, growling hum, rising from deep beneath the earth. Evelyn stood frozen in place, the ground beneath her feet seeming to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The bloom had awakened, and now there was no turning back. Evelyn stumbled out of the cellar, her mind whirling with the weight of what she had just uncovered. The papers she had found, the warning from her grandfather, all pointed to the same horrifying truth. The harvest bloom was not a mere plant, but a terrible force that demanded a price. She could feel the darkness pressing in on her, seeping into her very bones. The whispering voices, the shadow in the corner of the cellar. It was as if the house itself had come alive, aware of her. Intrusion, aware of her desperation. She needed air. She needed to escape the suffocating weight of the farmhouse. The fog outside had thickened, wrapping the farm in an oppressive, unnatural silence. The mist was no longer a soft veil, but a heavy, pulsing presence, a blanket that smothered the world. It clung to her skin, cold and wet, as she walked across the yard, her legs shaky and unsteady. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the chill of the morning air mingling with the fear that coiled in her chest. It was the fear of knowing the truth, the fear of realizing that the power she sought was not a gift, but a curse, and she was already too far gone to turn back. Evelyn's eyes darted to the garden. The lavender flowers she had seen earlier, the ones that had glowed with an eerie light, were now dead, their once vibrant petals withered and decayed. Yet the scent of lavender still lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as though the plant had left an imprint on the very atmosphere, marking her as its next victim. The faintest sound broke the silence, a cry, distant but unmistakable. It came from the direction of the barn, a hollow, mournful sound that seemed to echo from the earth itself. Evelyn froze, her blood running cold. It was not the cry of an animal, nor the wind. It was something else. Something ancient. A shiver ran down her spine as the cry pierced the air again, louder this time, reverberating through the ground beneath her feet. It was as if the earth itself was weeping, its sorrow deep and unyielding. Evelyn's heart raced as she turned toward the barn, drawn to the sound, despite the terror that clawed at her. With each step toward the barn, the air grew heavier, thicker, with the weight of unseen forces. The fog seemed to close in around her, muffling her movements, as if the very space around her was closing in, trapping her. The cry came again, louder now, closer, like a dying breath. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she approached the barn doors, her hands trembling. The door groaned as she pushed it open, the familiar scent of aged wood and damp hay filling her senses. But there was something wrong with the barn. It felt wrong, like the very bones of the building had shifted. The walls, once sturdy and reliable, now seemed to bend and warp under some unseen pressure. The barn was larger inside than it had any right to be, as if it had expanded in the darkness. The cry echoed through the barn, more desperate now, a pleading sound that seemed to vibrate in her chest. It was coming from somewhere deep inside the structure, from beneath the floorboards, as though it were coming from the very foundation of the barn. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she followed the sound, her footsteps slow and cautious. At the far end of the barn, she found it, the trap door. The floorboards around it were warped, as though something beneath had pushed against them, from below, distorting the wood. The cry came again, louder now, a tortured, hollow wail that sent chills down her spine. Without thinking, Evelyn kneeled beside the trapdoor, her hand hovering over the rusted iron ring. The smell of earth and decay wafted up from the crack beneath the door, a musty, fetid odor that made her stomach turn. She hesitated for only a moment before pulling the ring, the old wood groaning as the trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the dark. The air that rose from the depths was cool, damp, and thick with the scent of earth and something older, something foul. The cry had stopped, but its echo still lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder that whatever lay beneath the barn was waiting for her. With her heart pounding in her chest, Evelyn descended into the darkness. The staircase was steep, the wooden steps creaking under her weight as she made her way down. The further she went, the colder it became, until the air felt like ice biting into her skin. The walls of the basement were rough stone, damp with age and moisture. The faintest light from the outside world filtered through cracks in the foundation, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, Evelyn found herself in a narrow passage, barely wide enough for her to walk through. The walls seemed to press in on her, the stone jagged and unforgiving. She moved forward, her every step echoing through the stillness. Then, ahead of her, she saw it. A small, dimly lit chamber, its floor covered in strange markings. Symbols, runes and sigils had been etched into the stone floor, their meaning lost to time. In the center of the room lay an altar, its surface cracked and worn with age. And there, lying on the altar, was a plant, a flower, the harvest bloom. But it wasn't like the one in the garden. This one was different, its petals dark and withered, the once vibrant purple now blackened, curling inward like the fingers of a hand. The air around it was heavy, thick with the same oppressive energy that had surrounded the garden. The flower seemed to pulse as if it were alive, its presence filling the room with an unearthly weight. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the bloom, the one that had been hidden away, buried beneath the earth for so long. But as she approached, she noticed something else. A figure stood beside the altar, its form barely visible in the dim light. It was hunched, its face hidden in the shadows, but the shape of it, its posture, was unmistakable. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as the figure turned toward her. The face was not human. It was twisted, contorted, a grotesque mockery of life. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural, otherworldly light, and its mouth stretched into a grin that sent a wave of pure terror crashing over her. The figure spoke, its voice hollow, as if emerging from the depths of the earth itself. "Do you still—" "Seek it, Evelyn," the voice rasped. "Do you still believe you can control the bloom?" Evelyn stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure stepped closer, its eyes fixed on her, its presence suffocating. The bloom was no longer just a plant. It was something more, something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. The air grew colder still, and the whispers began again, louder this time, filling the chamber with voices she could not understand. They were growing louder, their volume rising until they became a roar, a deafening cacophony. The bloom was calling her, and it was waiting. The figure standing before her in the chamber felt as though it was not merely a physical presence, but something far older, something tied to the very fabric of the earth. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts spinning wildly. She had come here looking for answers, but the truth that had greeted her was far darker than she had ever anticipated. This figure, this thing, was not merely an echo of the harvest bloom. It was a manifestation of everything that had been buried beneath the earth, waiting for her to seek it out. Her body trembled, frozen in place. The figure did not move. It stood still, watching her with those impossible eyes. And Evelyn could feel something shifting in the air, a weight pressing down on her chest. The whispers, the distorted voices grew louder, swirling around her like a swarm of insects, filling the chamber with their eerie chorus. "Do you still seek it?" the figure rasped again, its voice as hollow as a distant, forgotten memory. The words felt like a knife in her gut, cold and sharp, digging into her sense of self. "You cannot undo what has been done, Evelyn Holt. You cannot bring him back." The words struck her with an intensity that left her breathless. It was the same truth Harold had tried to warn her about. But hearing it from the mouth of this creature, this being that had risen from the very soil, made it real, made it undeniable. She had made a terrible mistake. She had come too far, delved too deep into the dark heart of her obsession, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn back. Not now. "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling as she took a step back, desperate to create some distance between herself and the horror that stood before her. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it moved slowly, as though the weight of time itself clung to its limbs. It didn't walk. There was no need for such a human action. It simply seemed to glide, a shadow woven into the very darkness of the chamber. It was then that Evelyn saw the faintest flicker of a face, gaunt, hollowed cheeks, lips stretched into a grimace that seemed to crack open like a wound. The figure's eyes gleamed with an unearthly light, like two tiny stars burning with an inner fire. "Do you know her?" the figure asked, its voice now softer, but no less menacing. "Do you know the woman who tried to protect you from all this?" Evelyn's stomach churned. The mention of a woman stirred something in her memory. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her past, the things she had buried beneath years of grief and loss. And then it hit her. Marta Radford. The strange old woman who lived at the edge of the town, the one who had always been a mystery, her existence surrounded by rumors and half-whispered tales. She had always been an enigma to Evelyn, a figure that seemed to exist on the outskirts of reality. But now, with the figure before her, she realized that Marta had known something, had seen something, that she herself had not understood until now. Marta had been trying to protect her from the bloom. The figure's hollow smile grew wider, as if it could sense the dawning realization in Evelyn. She knows. She always knew. She is the last to remember what your family has forgotten, but she will not help you now. Evelyn felt a sudden surge of panic, a gnawing fear that twisted in her gut. The creature, whatever it was right. Marta had warned her, had spoken cryptically about the bloom, but Evelyn had dismissed it, too consumed by her grief and obsession to listen. The woman who had known the most about the bloom, who had seen its power firsthand, was now a faded memory, buried in the fog of the past, and Evelyn had ignored every warning. Without thinking, she turned on her heel and raced out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the dark passageway. The whispers still followed her, their voices growing louder, more insistent, as if they were chasing her, pulling her back toward the horrors she had just witnessed. The air felt thick with the weight of the creature's presence, like the very walls of the earth were pressing in on her. Every step she took was a step toward the realization that she could never outrun what she had unleashed. Evelyn emerged into the barn, gasping for air, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold air hit her like a slap to the face, and she staggered, forward trying to clear her mind. She had to get out of here. She had to find Marta. She had to find a way to stop this, to undo the curse that she had foolishly walked into. The barn doors creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan, and Evelyn stumbled outside. The mist had thickened even further, now swirling around her in dense shifting patterns that seemed almost alive. The air was heavy with the scent of the lavender flower, its perfume cloying and overpowering. It wrapped around her like a noose, tightening with every breath she took. She didn't know how much time had passed, but she knew one thing for certain. She could no longer rely on her own judgment. The bloom, its power, its curse, was too great, too dangerous. She needed help. She needed someone who could understand it, someone who had seen it before, someone who might still be able to stop it. Her feet moved instinctively, carrying her through the fog past the old buildings of the farm. The journey to Marta's house was long, the fog thickening with every step, making it harder to see. The town, once familiar to her, now seemed like a foreign landscape, its streets twisted and distorted, a reflection of the madness she had stepped into. When she finally arrived at Marta Radford's house, it was dark. The small cottage at the edge of town was shrouded in shadows, the windows dark and lifeless. Evelyn knocked urgently on the door, her hand trembling as she rapped against the wood. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Marta standing in the doorway, her weathered face a mask of stoic calm. "Marta," Evelyn gasped, her voice frantic. "You have to help me. I've made a mistake. The bloom, it's not just a flower. It's a curse. And I. Marta's eyes, sharp and unblinking, studied Evelyn with an unsettling intensity. I know, child, she said softly, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I know what you've awakened. And now, there is no going back. Evelyn's heart sank. It was too late. The bloom had already claimed her, and now there was only one thing left to do. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway of Marta Radford's cottage, her heart hammering in her chest. The old woman's words hung in the air between them, a dark weight pressing down on Evelyn's shoulders. There is no going back. It was the same cold truth that had settled deep inside her since the moment she had first touched the harvest bloom, since the moment its power had stirred within her. Marta stepped aside, allowing Evelyn into the dimly lit cottage. The space was small, crowded with shelves full of oddments, crystals, jars of dried herbs, and faded books with cracked spines. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, an earthy, herbal aroma that made Evelyn's head spin. It was a comfort somehow, the scent of something old and forgotten. But it did little to calm the gnawing dread that twisted her insides. As Marta closed the door behind her, Evelyn took in the room. There were no windows here, only the flickering light of candles casting long shadows across the walls. The atmosphere felt thick, oppressive, as though the cottage itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Evelyn's hands shook as she turned to Marta. "Please, you have to tell me what to do. I can't." Her voice faltered, breaking under the weight of the terror she felt. "The bloom, Marta. I've seen it. I've touched it. And now I can feel it. I can feel it inside me." Marta's gaze never wavered, her eyes unreadable. She moved slowly, deliberately, toward the far corner of the room, where a large, ornate mirror stood against the wall. Its surface was cracked, spiderwebbing in every direction, the fractures running so deep that it looked almost as if the glass itself had been shattered and pieced back together, only to shatter again. "That mirror," Marta said softly, "was once used by your family. It holds more than just reflections, Evelyn. It holds memories, truths that no one wants to see. You may think you understand the bloom, but you have only scratched the surface. The mirror will show you what you need to know, but it will not. Be kind." Evelyn swallowed hard, her mouth dry. She couldn't pull her gaze from the mirror. There was something magnetic about it, something about the cracked glass that seemed to call to her. It was like the bloom itself, something that lured her in, something that promised answers but demanded a price. "I don't understand," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean it holds memories? I just need to find a way to stop this, to undo what I've done." Marta's lips twisted into a grim smile, but there was no warmth in it. "It's never about undoing, Evelyn. It's about knowing. And the truth, when it comes, is not something you can ignore. Not anymore." Evelyn took a hesitant step toward the mirror. Her reflection, fractured and broken, stared back at her, and she felt an involuntary shiver run through her. It was as if she were looking into a mirror that didn't just reflect her image, but her very soul, cracked and bruised from the weight of what she had done. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening as the light from the candles flickered. The whispers, once distant, were now louder, swirling around her ears like a swarm of bees. They were familiar voices, her brother Gabriel's voice, her father's, even her own. But they were distorted, fractured, like the image in the mirror. Each voice blended into the next, a chaotic mess of sound that filled her mind with confusion. "Look," Marta said, her voice soft but insistent. "Look into the mirror, Evelyn. The bloom has already touched you. It's part of you now. You must see it. You must understand what you've done." Evelyn hesitated. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they felt like a physical presence, pressing against her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. She had to know. She had to see the truth, even if it tore her apart. With trembling hands, Evelyn reached out toward the mirror. The cool glass shivered beneath her fingertips, and as she touched it, something shifted. A sharp crack sounded from within the mirror, as if the very fabric of reality was splitting in two. Her reflection twisted, distorted, and then the image began to change. At first, it was subtle. Her own face rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. And then, slowly, she saw something else. It was a figure, half-formed, rising from the depths of the mirror. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but Evelyn knew who he was. Gabriel. He was standing in the mirror, his body flickering like a dying flame. His eyes were wide and hollow, staring at her with an expression that Evelyn could not quite place. Fear, anger, and something else. Something that seemed like a warning. His lips moved, but no sound came from his mouth. The whispers in the room grew louder, the voices of her family calling to her. But Gabriel's form in the mirror remained silent. Suddenly, the image shifted again. Gabriel's face twisted into something unrecognizable, his features contorting. In pain, his mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. The air around Evelyn grew thick with an unbearable pressure, as though the very room were closing in on her. The figure in the mirror lurched forward, its form rippling like water, reaching out toward her. Evelyn recoiled, stumbling backward, but her reflection did not move. The figure remained in the glass, its eyes fixed on her. She could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. The whispers were no longer just voices, they were cries, desperate and pleading, from people she loved, from people she had failed. The mirror cracked again, this time louder, and Evelyn felt a sharp, searing pain in her chest. She gasped, clutching at her heart as the glass shattered completely, sending shards cascading to the floor in a spray of jagged edges. The room seemed to collapse in on itself, the walls closing in, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she might suffocate in the darkness. But then, it was gone. The room fell silent. The mirror was shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor like remnants of a forgotten world. The whispers had stopped, leaving only the sound of her ragged breathing and the thudding of her heart in her ears. "Do you see now?" Marta's voice was calm, but there was a flicker of something dark behind her eyes. "The bloom feeds on your guilt, on your grief. It pulls you in, gives you false hope, and then it consumes you. It is not a flower, it is a force, and it will take everything from you." Evelyn's mind raced, her chest heaving as she tried to process what she had just seen. Gabriel's face in the mirror twisted in pain. Had it been a warning? Was it really him, or something else pretending to be him? I didn't know," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. I thought I could fix it. I thought the bloom could bring him back. But now it's too late, isn't it?" Marta stepped closer, her old eyes softening, though the weight of her words hung heavy between them. "It was always too late. The bloom is not for healing, it is for loss. And now, Evelyn, you must decide if you are willing to lose everything." Evelyn didn't know how to answer. The truth had shattered her, just like the mirror. She had wanted to undo the past, but in her desperation she had created a future that she couldn't escape. The bloom had claimed her, and now it would never let go. The weight of Marta's words lingered in Evelyn's mind, suffocating her as she stood there in the ruined silence of the cottage. The shattered mirror pieces lay at her feet, reflecting the distorted light of the candles, casting eerie patterns on the floor. Marta's eyes, unreadable and sharp, pierced through her, reminding Evelyn of the terrible truth that she had been trying to outrun. It was never about undoing. Evelyn had thought the bloom was the answer to her grief, a way to reclaim the past, to bring Gabriel back from the dead. But now, in the aftermath of her failed attempt, she realized the terrible cost of her obsession. The bloom wasn't a solution, it was a punishment, a force that fed on guilt, loss, and despair. And she had walked right into its trap. The air around them felt heavy, the silence pressing in on Evelyn's chest. Marta's gaze remained fixed on her, knowing that no more words needed to be spoken. It was clear now. The harvest bloom had already claimed her. It had seeped into her soul, feeding on her pain, weaving its power through every moment of her existence. It was a slow, inevitable process, and now it was too late for her to turn back. Evelyn's mind reeled with the vision from the cracked mirror, the distorted image of Gabriel, screaming silently, trapped in the glass. His face twisted in agony, but what hurt most was the look in his eyes. He had warned her. It was as if he had known, even in death, that she was headed towards something irreversible, something that she could never take back. I can't undo this, can I? Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Marta shook her head, her lips curling into a faint smile that held no warmth. No, Evelyn, not anymore. The words felt like a physical blow. It was the final nail in the coffin of her hopes, the confirmation of what she had feared all along. She had sealed her fate when she decided to tamper with the bloom's power. And now, she would pay the price. But the worst part was that she couldn't even be sure what that price would be. Was it her life, her soul, her mind? Her thoughts scattered as the weight of her realization pressed down harder, threatening to crush her. She had destroyed everything for a chance at a fleeting dream of resurrection. Now, there would be nothing left. Marta seemed to sense her spiraling thoughts. She stood, silent for a moment, before moving toward the small wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. Her hands, aged and weathered, opened the cabinet door, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in dark cloth. She placed it gently on the table before Evelyn, who blinked in confusion as she gazed down at it. "What is this?" Evelyn asked, her voice low and shaky. "This," Marta said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning, "is the last piece of the puzzle. You've already set things into motion, Evelyn, but there's one last choice left to make." Evelyn swallowed, her stomach tightening with dread. "A choice?" she echoed. "What choice?" Marta met her gaze, her eyes flickering, with something Evelyn couldn't quite place. Sadness, perhaps, or maybe something darker. The bloom is not just a flower. It is not a cure, nor a curse. It is a choice, a cycle. Every person who seeks it must decide whether to accept the consequences of its power or to let it consume them entirely. And the bloom has chosen you, Evelyn. But now it's up to you to decide whether you can break free or whether you will let it take everything. Evelyn's hands shook as she reached for the cloth, her fingers trembling in the air before they made contact with the rough fabric. She unwrapped it slowly, each movement weighted with the fear of what lay inside. Her breath hitched when she saw it, a small vial filled with a glowing, milky liquid. The faintest light emanated from the vial, as though it contained something alive, something pulsing with energy. "This," Evelyn's voice faltered. "What is it?" "It's the antidote," Marta said softly, her tone grave. "The only way to sever your connection to the bloom. It will undo what has been done." But her voice trailed off, and Evelyn looked up to see the old woman's eyes narrowing, as though she were measuring the very essence of Evelyn's soul. "There's a price for this too." Evelyn stared at the vial, the liquid swirling within it like a living thing. It seemed to call to her, promising an escape from the madness she had unwittingly created. The whispers of the bloom seemed to hum louder in her ears, urging her to take it, to finally free herself from the torment that had followed her since Gabriel's death. But the doubt crept in, cold and heavy. "What do you mean? What price?" Marta didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back, her eyes softening with the weight of experience. "The bloom has already marked you. The power it offers isn't easily undone. If you drink this, you will sever your bond with it. The connection will break, but the bloom will not be satisfied. It will want something from you in return." Evelyn's heart sank. The weight of her grief, her guilt, her obsession, it had all led her here. To this moment, this impossible decision. But could she truly sever herself from the bloom, from the thing that had taken hold of her soul? Or would the price be too high? She stared at the vial in her hand, the light within it swirling like a storm. She could feel the weight of the bloom's presence inside her, its grip tightening around her chest with every passing second. But could she truly give it up? Marta's voice interrupted her thoughts, soft but insistent. "The price may not be what you expect, Evelyn. But if you drink this, you will lose something precious. Something you will never get back." Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of the decision settling on her like an iron shackle. It felt as though the room was closing in on her, the air thick with anticipation. The bloom would never let her go, not without a sacrifice. She had known this from the beginning, and now she would have to choose. Her hand trembled as she raised the vial to her lips. "Do you still want to make that choice?" Marta's voice was like a distant whisper, as if she knew the answer, but wanted Evelyn to decide for herself. Evelyn took a deep breath, the weight of her grief and guilt crashing over her. With one final, desperate breath, she tipped the vial toward her mouth. And then, as she swallowed the liquid, the room seemed to collapse around her. The moment Evelyn swallowed the liquid, it felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The world seemed to warp and bend, the very air around her thickening like a heavy fog, clouding her senses. Her throat burned as the liquid descended into her chest, and an unsettling warmth spread through her veins, filling her body with a strange, pulsing energy. But it wasn't the relief she had expected. No, it was something darker, something much more invasive, as if the bloom itself was fighting back, resisting the antidote, clawing at the very core of her being. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. But just as quickly, the feeling passed, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. It was as though the bloom's presence had been severed, but in its place was an even more profound sense of loss. Evelyn took a deep breath, but the air around her felt thin and brittle, as though it couldn't support her. For a long moment she stood there, trembling, unsure if anything had truly changed. Had she really freed herself from the bloom, or had it simply taken something else from her? The silence in the cottage was deafening, the only sound the soft crackling of the candles in the corners of the room. Marta was watching her, her gaze unreadable, as if she were waiting for something to happen, but Evelyn couldn't be sure what. The old woman's expression seemed to flicker between pity and something else, something darker. Evelyn's heart ached as she wondered if she had made the wrong choice. "Is it done?" Evelyn asked, her voice hoarse, unsure if she was speaking to Marta or to herself. Marta nodded slowly, though her eyes betrayed a hint of hesitation. "The bloom's hold on you is broken. For now." "For now," Evelyn repeated, the weight of those words settling into her chest like a stone. "What do you mean, for now?" Marta's lips tightened. She glanced down at her hands, fingers trembling slightly, before meeting Evelyn's gaze once more. "The bloom does not give up so easily. It will always try to reclaim what it has lost, especially when it has been disturbed. It is not just A plant, Evelyn. It is a force, a living thing that is tied to the earth itself. And the earth is hungry. Evelyn frowned, her mind spinning. The bloom was still alive. Even now, after everything, she could feel its presence stirring somewhere beneath the surface of her thoughts, like a distant whisper she couldn't escape. It had not let go, not fully. "I'm not free, am I?" Evelyn whispered, her heart sinking with the realization. Marta gave her a grave look. "No, you are never fully free from the bloom. It takes, and it never gives back." Evelyn's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed into the nearest chair. Her hands shook, the vial still clenched in her fingers, now an empty promise of salvation. The room around her seemed to spin as the full implications of Marta's words settled over her like a suffocating weight. She had taken the antidote. She had severed her bond with the bloom. But in doing so, had she only freed herself to be consumed by something else? Her mind flashed back to the garden where the bloom had first revealed itself to her. The way the earth had shifted beneath her feet, the way the flowers had pulsed with an unnatural energy. And then, the figure she had seen in the cracked mirror, the distorted reflection of Gabriel, his silent scream echoing in her mind. It wasn't just the bloom she had touched. It was something far older, far more dangerous than anything she had ever realized. She couldn't escape it. It was tied to her family, to the very land itself. "I need to go back," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice firm with a new sense of purpose. She stood up, her legs still unsteady but her determination growing with every passing second. "I need to go back to the garden." Marta's expression hardened. "No, the garden is no longer a place for you, Evelyn. The bloom will not be found there. It has already begun to take root elsewhere. You've disturbed the balance, and now it will find a new host." Evelyn's heart clenched. "What do you mean? It's going to find someone else?" "Someone else will have to pay for what I have done." Marta nodded slowly. "The bloom does not care about the cost to those it touches. It only seeks to survive. It has already latched onto you, but now that you've broken its bond with you, it will find another way to grow. It feeds on grief, on guilt, on the things that bind souls to this earth, and there is no escape. Once it has marked you, it will always seek you out, and it will find another." Evelyn felt a cold chill spread through her. She had known, deep down, that she couldn't escape the bloom. But to hear it spoken aloud, to realize that her actions would ripple through the world and touch someone else, someone innocent, filled her with a wave of guilt and despair. She had tried to fix the past. She had tried to undo the loss of Gabriel. But in doing so, she had set something far more dangerous into motion. The whispers of the bloom began to rise again, faint but insistent, their voices like distant echoes in the back of her mind. They had never truly gone away. And now, she could feel them growing louder, closer, pulling her back into the depths of the darkness she had tried so desperately to escape. "I have to stop it," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with a new sense of resolve. "I have to find a way to stop it." Marta watched her for a long moment before speaking, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "There is only one way to stop it, Evelyn. One way to sever the bloom's hold." "On you for good," Evelyn's breath caught. "What is it?" Marta didn't answer immediately. She simply stood there, watching Evelyn, her eyes filled with something Evelyn couldn't quite place. After a moment, she spoke again. "You have to destroy the garden. The source of the bloom must be eradicated. It is the only way to truly break free." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Destroy the garden. It was the one place where the bloom had first taken root, the one place where it had awakened. But to destroy it, to erase the very source of the bloom's power. Was it possible? Was it even the right thing to do? For a long time, Evelyn stood there, weighing the decision in her mind. She had already lost so much. Could she really bear to destroy the place that had once been the heart of her family's legacy? The whispers in her mind grew louder, swirling, into a storm of voices that threatened to drown her. You can't escape it. You never could. And in that moment, Evelyn knew what she had to do. To save herself, and to save anyone else who might fall victim to the bloom, she had to destroy everything it had touched. She turned to Marta, her voice steady now, her resolve hardening like stone. I will do it. I'll destroy the garden. Marta's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Evelyn saw the flicker of sorrow in her eyes. Then it is done. But be warned, Evelyn. There will be no return from this. You will lose what you love most. You will have to give something up. Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the price she would pay. But there was no other choice. The bloom had claimed her, had twisted her reality into something dark and unbearable. It would not stop until everything she loved was gone. And now, it was time to end it. The air outside was colder than it had ever been before. Evelyn barely noticed the biting chill as she walked toward Harrowstone Farm, her steps heavy with the weight of her decision. The fog clung to her like a second skin, obscuring everything. Ahead of her, making it impossible to tell where the earth ended and the sky began. The world had become a blur of indistinct shapes, a landscape swallowed by grief, fear, and a growing dread that she could no longer ignore. The whispers of the bloom had not stopped. They followed her everywhere, curling around her thoughts, slipping between the cracks in her mind, urging her forward, deeper into the heart of the curse. She could feel its presence, lurking just beneath her skin, a constant reminder of what she had allowed to grow. It wasn't just the bloom anymore. It was something far darker, something that had taken root in her soul. And now there was no way to stop it. The garden was waiting. The source of the bloom's power, the place where it had first begun, was still there, hidden beneath the twisted vines and overgrown weeds. It was calling to her, the pull of its power impossible to resist. Evelyn had tried to outrun it, had tried to sever herself from it with the antidote, but it had only delayed the inevitable. The bloom would not let go. It would not rest until it had claimed her completely. As she neared the farm, she heard it, a low, distant sound carried by the wind, a bell. The mournful toll seemed to rise from the earth itself, vibrating through her bones, sending a shiver of dread down her spine. The sound was not like any bell she had ever heard. It wasn't a church bell or the tolling of a clock. It was something ancient, something that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the world. It was a sound that echoed through the corridors of time, a warning, a summons. Evelyn stopped, in her tracks, the sound growing louder with each passing second. The tolling of the bell filled her ears, drowning out everything else, until it felt like the entire world was reverberating with its call. She turned in circles, her eyes searching, the fog trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. But there was nothing, just the thick, suffocating mist and the endless stretch of the farm before her. The bell tolled again, and this time the sound seemed to shake the ground beneath her. It wasn't just a noise, it was a presence, an undeniable force that reached deep into her chest, pulling at her heart, tearing at the fragile thread that held her together. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The tolling wasn't just a sound, it was a signal, a warning. It was as though the bell was speaking to her, telling her that she had come too far, that there was no turning back. She had disturbed the bloom, and now it was time to face the consequences. With trembling hands, Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out the vial. the vial that had once held the antidote. The empty glass now seemed like a cruel reminder of the decision she had made. She had thought that swallowing the liquid would free her from the bloom's grip, but instead, it had only made her more aware of its power. It had not let her go. It had only become more insistent. The bell tolled again, this time louder, more insistent, and Evelyn could no longer stand still. She turned, her legs moving on their own, her feet carrying her toward the garden. The path was overgrown, the ground thick with weeds and twisted vines that seemed to reach out to her as she passed, brushing against her legs like cold fingers. As she reached the edge of the garden, she stopped. The air here felt different, charged, heavy with the weight of what had happened and what was still to come. The mist seemed to part slightly, revealing the garden in its full, desolate beauty. The flowers were gone, their petals withered and dead, their stems broken and decayed, yet the space felt alive, pulsing with an energy that seemed to emanate from the very soil beneath her feet. Evelyn looked down at the ground. The earth here was blackened, as if something had taken root deep below the surface and drained the life from the land. The soil was cracked, fissures running through it like the veins of a dying heart. It was here, in this darkened soil, that the bloom had taken its first breath, and it was here that it would be destroyed. The bell tolled once more, a deafening sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. It was closer now, its tolls rhythmic, each one louder than the last, like the heartbeat of something ancient and malevolent. The sound wasn't coming from the church bell tower, as she had first thought. It was coming from within the earth itself, from the very heart of the farm, from the place where the bloom had first taken root. Evelyn stepped forward, her heart racing, the earth beneath her feet seeming to pulse in time with the tolling bell. She felt the weight of the bloom pressing against her chest, as if it were a living thing wrapped around her, suffocating her with its hunger. The soil beneath her feet seemed to ripple, as though something were moving beneath it, something ancient and powerful, waiting for her to make the final move. She knelt down, her fingers trembling as she touched the cracked earth. The ground felt cold and damp, and as her hand brushed the surface, a jolt of energy shot through her, a surge of dark power that made her skin crawl. She gasped, pulling her hand away, but the sensation lingered, crawling up her arm, sinking into her very bones. The bell tolled again, and this time it was followed by something else, a low rumble, like the sound of thunder rolling through the earth. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the soil shifting as though something was waking. Up, stirring beneath the surface, the bloom had felt her touch. It knew she was here. Evelyn's heart raced, her mind spinning with terror. She had come here to destroy it, to end this curse once and for all. But now, in the face of the bloom's power, she wasn't so sure. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the bloom was too powerful to be stopped? But then, she remembered the warning in her grandfather's journal, the price of resurrection. The bloom could not be controlled. It could only be destroyed. With a final desperate breath, Evelyn pulled herself to her feet and took a step forward, her eyes locked on the center of the garden. The earth trembled again, the rumble growing louder, as if the very land was warning her to turn back. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. She had to end it. The tolling of the bell grew louder, more frantic, echoing in her ears like the sound of her own heartbeat. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, Evelyn plunged her hands into the blackened soil, and everything went silent. The silence that followed was so complete, so suffocating that Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her fingers were buried deep in the earth, the soil cold and unyielding around her hands. She could feel the faint tremor beneath the ground, like a pulse of life or perhaps death, thrumming from the very core of the land. The bell had stopped tolling, its resonance now a distant memory, leaving only the thick, heavy air that pressed down on her chest. For a moment, Evelyn didn't move. She was frozen, her hands still planted in the cracked soil, unsure of what she had just done. Had she made the right choice? The earth beneath her seemed to respond to her touch, its vibrations growing stronger, more insistent. It was as if the land itself was waking up, responding to her intrusion. Her mind raced. What was happening? Why wasn't the bloom reacting as it had before? It should have been a violent response, a surge of energy, an eruption of power. Instead, there was only the pulse beneath her hands, steady and slow, like the slow beating of a heart. The bloom was alive. It was still here. But something felt different. Evelyn pulled her hands from the soil, her fingers slick with dark earth. She stared at her palms, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The ground was still trembling beneath her, and a strange feeling of vertigo washed over her, as though she were standing on the edge of a great precipice, looking down into something dark and infinite. The sensation was disorienting, like the fabric of reality itself was warping, unraveling just beneath her feet. She stumbled back, but the ground seemed to give way beneath her, the earth shifting, forming into something new, something strange. The garden, once overgrown and abandoned, now seemed to pulse with energy. The flowers that had been withered and dead began to stir, their stems twitching, their petals trembling in the faintest breeze. The ground seemed to breathe beneath her, and Evelyn could feel the weight of the bloom's presence everywhere. And then, in the center of the garden, she saw it. The bloom. It was not the same as before. It had changed, its petals now a dark shade, of violet, pulsing with an eerie light that seemed to radiate from within. The flower was not just a plant anymore. It was something more, something alive, something sentient. Its petals curled and stretched toward the sky, as though reaching for the very heavens themselves, drawing power from the earth and the air. Evelyn's chest tightened as she took a hesitant step closer to it. The bloom was growing, expanding, as though feeding off the energy that had surged into the garden from her touch. The air around it was thick with energy, dark and heavy, as though the very atmosphere had changed, had become tainted by the bloom's power. She could feel it now deep in her bones. The bloom wasn't just a plant. It was a force, a living entity that had taken root in the earth, feeding on grief, on guilt, on the brokenness of the human soul. The air seemed to shift around her, and for a moment she thought she saw something, someone in the garden with her. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing at the edge of the garden. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure moved, stepping slowly toward her, its form flickering in and out of existence, as though it were nothing more than a shadow. No, a reflection of herself. Evelyn blinked, and for an instant the world seemed to warp. The figure, her reflection, stood before her, its face obscured by the mist that hung heavy in the air. But she knew who it was. It was her, the Evelyn who had once been whole, before the bloom, before the loss of Gabriel, before the madness had taken hold of her. The reflection seemed to stare at her with hollow, empty eyes, its expression unreadable. "You cannot undo what has been done," the figure whispered, its voice a hollow echo of her own. "You have broken the veil between worlds. There is no turning back now." Evelyn's pulse raced as the reflection stepped closer. The garden around her seemed to pulse with the same energy, the same dark force, as if the bloom itself were feeding on her fear, on her despair. The figure's form flickered again, becoming clearer, and Evelyn could see the faint outline of Gabriel, his face twisted in pain, his eyes pleading with her. "You shouldn't have come," the figure said, its voice low and haunting. "You shouldn't have tried to bring me back. Now look at what you've done." The ground beneath her feet shifted, the earth cracking open with a loud, violent sound. Evelyn gasped, stumbling backward, but the reflection was already moving. Toward her, its form becoming more solid, more real with each step it took. It was not just a reflection anymore, it was something alive, something that had been born from the bloom's twisted power. "No," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "No, this isn't real." But it was real. It was real, and it was here. And it was pulling her closer, drawing her into the center of the garden, where the bloom pulsed with dark energy. The reflection reached out for her, its hand cold as ice, and as it touched her, the air seemed to shatter, like glass breaking, and the world around her fragmented into pieces. For a brief moment, Evelyn was weightless, suspended in a space between worlds, between the past and the present, between life and death. She could hear Gabriel's voice, faint, distant, but still there, calling to her from the darkness. "You did this. You brought me back. And now, you will pay the price." The garden seemed to close in around her, the darkness growing thicker, pressing against her. The bloom's energy surged through her, pulling at her soul, consuming her from the inside out. She could feel it now, its hunger, its power, its need for her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. Evelyn opened her eyes, gasping for breath, her hands clutching the earth beneath her. She was back in the garden, the bloom before her, its petals now still, no longer pulsing with the dark energy. The reflection was gone, the figure had vanished, and the garden, too, was silent. But the silence felt different now. It was not an absence of sound. It was the silence of something waiting, something watching, something that had been awakened. The veil between the living and the dead had been broken, and Evelyn realized, with a sickening twist of her stomach, that the bloom's power had already taken root in her soul. There was no turning back now. The silence in the garden was suffocating. Evelyn stood at the center of it, feeling as though she had entered a place beyond time and reason. The bloom before her was no longer a mere plant. It had become something far greater, something far darker. Its petals, once pulsing with unnatural energy, were now still, but they seemed to hum with a power that reverberated in her chest. The garden, too, had changed. It was no longer a place of overgrown decay, but a space of tension, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for the next step in a twisted cycle. Evelyn's thoughts were scattered, her mind racing with the memory of the figure, the reflection of herself, and the warning it had given her. She had broken the veil between worlds, and now she could feel it. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of something ancient and terrible. The whispers of the bloom had intensified, but they no longer felt like mere voices. They felt like commands, like the very earth was speaking to her. She stumbled backward, her legs weak beneath her. The ground trembled once more, a low hum rising from the soil. But this time it was different. The vibration was stronger, more insistent, as if the garden itself had become alive, responding to her presence. She could feel it now, deep in her bones, a pull, a magnetic force, drawing her toward the heart of the bloom. But something else was there, something just beyond her reach. A sound, barely perceptible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was faint, like the rustling of leaves, but there was something more to it, a presence, a figure moving through the mist, just out of sight. Evelyn turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. It was Harold. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and she froze in place. She hadn't seen him since their conversation at the library, when he had warned her of the dangers of meddling with the bloom's power. But here he was, standing at the edge of the garden, his figure shrouded by the fog that clung to the earth. "Harold." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper, as though the words themselves were afraid to leave her mouth. Harold did not answer. He simply stood there, his form motionless, his face obscured by the mist. The garden seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment everything was still, as though the earth itself was waiting for him to speak. Evelyn took a tentative step forward. "Harold, what are you doing here?" Still he did not respond, but his presence was undeniable. She could feel him there, even if she couldn't see his face, and it was as if his very stillness held the weight of something far darker than the garden itself. She moved toward him, her legs shaking, her thoughts tangled in confusion and fear. The bloom's pull grew stronger with every step she took, but the presence of Harold, the silent witness to her descent, was almost as overpowering. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "You shouldn't have come back, Evelyn." The words were so simple, yet they struck her like a blow to the chest. Her heart clenched in her ribs as she stopped in her tracks, staring at the faint outline of Harold through the mist. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I had to come back. I thought I could stop this. I thought I could undo what I'd done, but I can't. I can't." Harold's silhouette shifted, but he did not move closer. Instead, his form seemed to fade slightly, as if he were caught between two places, neither fully present nor fully absent. "You've done more than just awaken the bloom, Evelyn," Harold said, his voice growing more distant with each word. "You've broken the boundaries, you've let it in, and now it's part of you." Evelyn felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. "I don't understand. What do you mean? What has happened to me?" Harold's voice remained calm, but there was something unsettling in the way it echoed around her. "The bloom is more than just a plant. It's a doorway, Evelyn, a portal between the living and the dead. And once you've touched it, once you've made contact, it changes you. It changes everything." The air around Evelyn grew heavy again, the mist swirling around her like a living thing. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she processed Harold's words. A doorway, a portal. That was what the bloom had been all along, a threshold, a way to reach the other side. And now she was caught in between, a witness to the unthinkable. Suddenly, Harold's form flickered, his silhouette becoming more transparent, like a ghost caught between worlds. "I came to warn you," he continued, his voice growing fainter. "But it's too late now. There's no escaping it. The bloom has taken root in you, Evelyn. You're no longer just a person. You're a part of it." Evelyn's vision blurred, her mind spinning as the weight of his words sank in. Too late. The bloom was not just a plant or a curse. It had become part of her, woven into her very essence, and there was no way to escape it. "Harold," she cried, reaching out toward him, but the figure only shimmered, fading like smoke in the mist. With a final, almost imperceptible sigh, Harold's form vanished completely, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the garden. Her heart raced in her chest as the realization hit her like a physical blow. Harold was gone, but his warning lingered in the air, a heavy weight on her shoulders. The bloom had taken root, not just in the earth, but in her very soul. She had awakened something far worse than she could have imagined. As she turned back toward the center of the garden, she saw that the bloom had changed once more. It was no longer just a flower. It had become something else entirely, a force, a presence, a manifestation of everything she had sought to escape. The petals of the bloom were now open, not with vibrant color, but with an ethereal glow, like the light of 1,000 lost souls, swirling together into a singular, consuming energy. It was waiting for her. The whispers had returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices rising from the depths of the earth. The bloom was calling her back, pulling at her, demanding her surrender. And Evelyn knew, deep in her soul, that she had come to the end of the path. There was no way out. The veil between worlds had been broken and the bloom had claimed its prize. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Evelyn could feel the earth under her feet shudder, as though it were waking up from a long, unbroken sleep. Her mind was a maelstrom of thoughts and emotions, fear, guilt, desperation. Everything was happening too quickly, spinning out of control. The bloom, no longer just a flower, loomed before her, its petals stretched wide, glowing with an unearthly light that seemed to burn through the thick mist. The garden had transformed, its once decayed and overgrown landscape now alive with energy. Every blade of grass, every leaf trembling with the dark force that emanated from the heart of the bloom. The whispers, low and dissonant, now seemed to come from every direction. They filled her ears, her mind, her very being. Come closer. They beckoned, their voices fractured and pleading. It's too late. Come closer and embrace what you have awakened. She staggered backward, her pulse racing, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the bloom. The sight of it, the way its petals shimmered with unnatural light, made her heart ache with a combination of awe and terror. It was as if it were calling to her, reaching deep into her soul, awakening a hunger she didn't fully understand. And yet, there was something familiar about it, something that felt like home, like it had always been a part of her, waiting for her to return. Suddenly the ground beneath her cracked open, a sharp, jagged sound like the breaking of ancient bones. The earth trembled violently, sending a wave of terror rushing through her. Evelyn cried out, but the sound was drowned out by the rumble of the soil shifting, as if the land itself had come alive. Something was moving beneath her feet. Something was awakening, and she could feel it, like a pulse under her skin. With a gasp, she stumbled back, her foot slipping in the wet earth as she fell to her knees. The bloom seemed to respond to her fall, its petals closing tightly around, its core as though it were feeding off the terror she felt. The air grew colder, thicker, and the once faint whispers became more distinct, more urgent, until they felt like they were speaking directly to her. You should have never come back, the voices whispered. You should have never sought to undo what was never meant to be undone. Now, there will be a reckoning. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The garden was no longer the place she had once known. It was something else now, something alien, as though the very fabric of reality had been twisted by the bloom's influence. The air around her shimmered with unnatural light, and the soil beneath her hands seemed to writhe, pulsating with a life of its own. The ground shifted again, this time more violently. A deep rumble echoed through the earth as something large and heavy broke through the surface. Evelyn stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat as a massive root emerged from the earth. It twisted and coiled like a serpent, thick and pulsing with dark energy. The root seemed to have a life of its own, writhing toward the bloom with an unmistakable sense of purpose, as if it were trying to feed the flower, or perhaps fuel its growing power. The bloom's petals flared open again, and Evelyn saw something more, a figure, faint but growing clearer, emerging from the darkness beneath the soil. It was a shadow, a silhouette at first, but it was no longer just a reflection. It was real, solid, and it was coming toward her. The figure moved slowly, dragging itself out of the ground, its form twisted and malformed, as though it had been half-formed from the earth itself. Evelyn froze, her blood running cold. The figure's face was indistinct, but she could feel its presence, a weight of darkness that seemed to press against her very soul. It was like the embodiment of everything the bloom represented: loss, decay, and hunger. The figure reached out toward her with elongated arms, its fingers twisted like roots, scraping against the air as it drew closer. And as it did, the earth continued to crack open, more roots and tendrils emerging, each one curling toward the bloom, feeding it, strengthening it. In that moment, Evelyn realized what she had unleashed. The bloom wasn't just feeding on the earth, it was birthing something that had been locked away for generations. And it was using her guilt and grief to break free. The figure that emerged from the soil was not just a manifestation of the bloom. It was a physical manifestation of the curse, of the lost souls that had been tied to the land for centuries. They had been waiting, buried beneath the surface, waiting for the bloom to return, to release them. The figure's voice was like the groan of the earth, deep and guttural, carrying with it the weight of countless years of suffering. You are the cause of this, it whispered, its voice both familiar and foreign. You have awakened us. Now you will pay the price. Evelyn's chest tightened, and she staggered back as the figure took another step forward, its form becoming more solid, more real with each movement. She tried to move, to escape, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift again, pulling her in, anchoring her to the spot. The bloom's power was wrapping around her, pulling her closer to the figure, to the darkness that had been released. You cannot run, the figure rasped, its voice growing louder, more insistent. You are bound to us now, bound to the curse of the bloom. Evelyn screamed, but the sound was lost in the rising crescendo of the bloom's hum. The earth was alive now, moving with dark energy, the roots and tendrils of the bloom stretching across. The land, reaching for the sky, pulling everything into its grasp. She had thought she could stop it. She had thought that by coming back, by facing the bloom, she could break the cycle. But now, standing in the heart of the garden, she realized that the cycle could never be broken. The bloom had always been here. It had always been waiting. And now, it was feeding, not just on the earth, but on her. With a final agonizing cry, Evelyn fell to her knees, the weight of the bloom's power crushing her. The figure loomed over her, its hands outstretched, as the world around her continued to break apart, consumed by the bloom's hunger. And in that moment, she understood. The harvest had begun. Evelyn's mind was a blur, a storm of panic and disbelief. The figure looming over her, its twisted limbs stretching out from the blackened earth, seemed to draw closer with every breath she took. The air was thick, suffocating with the pulse of the bloom, the energy it radiated vibrating through her bones. It was no longer a distant power. It was something that had wrapped itself around her, entangling her soul in its insidious grip. She could feel the weight of it inside her chest, pressing against her ribcage, tightening with every heartbeat. The figure, half formed from the soil, its limbs reaching like roots, moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. Its face, still obscured, shifted as though the very darkness was its skin, a shifting mask that morphed from one horrifying shape to another. It was not human, nor was it entirely something of the earth. It was something beyond both, a creation of the bloom, born of the ancient curse that had haunted the land for generations. You, it whispered, its voice deep and resonating, like the groan of the earth itself. You have come to claim it. You thought you could control it. You thought you could undo what was done. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she stumbled back, but the ground beneath her feet buckled and she fell hard, her palms scraping against the soil. The garden around her seemed to close in, the air growing dense with the smell of wet, earth and decay. The bloom's roots writhed like serpents beneath the surface, their tendrils curling toward her, pulling her deeper into its grip. I didn't mean for this to happen, she gasped, her voice trembling as she looked up at the figure. I thought I could bring him back. I thought I could fix it." The figure's face shifted again, and for a brief moment, Evelyn thought she saw a flash of Gabriel's eyes, hollow, empty, full of sorrow. The figure's voice deepened, becoming colder, more condemning. "You cannot fix what has been broken," it murmured. "You cannot rewrite the past. The bloom does not heal, it only consumes." Evelyn's mind swirled. The bloom, this terrible, insatiable force, was not a cure. It wasn't something that could reverse time or erase pain. It was a parasite, a force of destruction that fed on loss, on grief, on the very human desire to undo death. And in her desperate quest to bring Gabriel back, she had set it free. She had unleashed something that could not be contained. The earth beneath her shifted again, the soil cracking and breaking as the bloom's roots seemed to pulse with power. Evelyn could feel it deep in her chest, this dark energy filling her, consuming her. She had been marked by the bloom, bound to it by her grief and her guilt. And now, there was no escape. "You thought you could bring him back," the figure whispered again, its voice softer, almost mocking. "But you have already paid the price. You will never be free. Not while the bloom lives." Evelyn's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to run, to break free from the nightmare that had consumed her life. But the figure was too close now, its presence overwhelming. The bloom's power was inside her, suffocating her, pulling her deeper into the darkness. "No," she gasped, her voice shaking with desperation. "I won't let it consume me. I won't let it take me." The figure reached out, its fingers long and twisted, like roots groping for the air. It touched her shoulder, and the instant its cold, earth-ridden touch met her skin, a jolt of energy coursed through her body. The force of it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs, and she gasped, her vision blurring. The roots beneath her feet seemed to tremble, as if in response to the touch. The bloom was alive, and it was feeding on her, feeding on the connection she had made, the bond she had created when she first reached for it. Evelyn screamed, her body convulsing with the shock of the bloom's power. It was as if the very core of her being was being ripped apart, her soul caught between life and death. She could feel it, the price of power, the cost of meddling with forces beyond her comprehension. The bloom would not give her Gabriel back. It would not heal her. It would consume her piece by piece until nothing remained but the hollow shell of a woman who had sought to undo the past. The figure's laugh echoed in the garden, a deep, chilling sound that resonated through the soil and the air. "You sought power, Evelyn, and now you have it. But know this, the bloom does not forgive. It does not forget." Evelyn writhed in pain, her hands gripping the soil beneath her as the bloom's energy surged through her veins. It was like fire, cold and hot at the same time, consuming her from the inside out. She could feel her body weakening, her energy draining, the power of the bloom filling her until it seemed there was no room for anything else. But then, a thought pierced through the fog of pain, a single, desperate thought. She had come to stop the bloom. She had come to destroy it. And if she couldn't stop it from consuming her, then perhaps she could stop it from consuming anyone else. Through the haze of darkness, Evelyn reached, deep within herself, her hands shaking, her body trembling under the strain of the bloom's power. The thought was clearer now. She had to destroy the source. She had to sever the bloom's hold once and for all, even if it meant giving everything she had. With a final, desperate cry, Evelyn gathered the last of her strength and forced herself to stand. The figure seemed to reach for her, its hands stretching toward her, but she turned away from it, facing the bloom, her eyes locking on its radiant, pulsing form. The bloom's energy surged, and Evelyn could feel it, a wave of dark power, more intense than ever, crashing over her. She didn't have much time. She didn't know how much longer she could resist. But one thing was certain. She had to make the ultimate sacrifice. With every ounce of strength, every breath she had left, Evelyn stepped forward. Her hand reached out toward the bloom, and as she made contact, the ground trembled violently, the roots beneath her feet shuddering in response. A dark, electric energy surged through her, but she held on. She would not let go. As her fingers closed around the bloom's stem, she felt it. Her soul was slipping away, her connection to everything she had known being severed. The price of power was being paid, and there was no turning back now. The bloom's hum grew louder, and as Evelyn's vision blurred, she knew she had done it. She had made the sacrifice. She had destroyed the source, but the cost was more than she had ever imagined. The earth was still trembling beneath Evelyn's feet, the ground vibrating as though it had become part of the bloom itself, a conduit for the power it had unleashed. She could feel the remnants of the dark energy swirling around her, clinging to her like a cloak of shadows. Her body felt heavy, the weight of the bloom's influence still pressing down on her, filling her with a sense of loss and emptiness. The garden, once a place of decay and desolation, now stood silent, eerily still, as though it had expended all its energy in the wake of the bloom's violent eruption. Evelyn's hands were still trembling, her breath shallow and labored as she pulled herself upright. The air around her felt thick with the remnants of the bloom's power, but the dark, oppressive energy that had once consumed everything seemed to be dissipating, fading slowly into the ground. The roots were no longer pulsing with life, and the garden was once again quiet. But the silence was different. It was the silence of something broken, something that had been irrevocably shattered. She had done it. She had stopped the bloom, or so she thought. But as the garden settled into its strange stillness, Evelyn felt the weight of a new kind of darkness taking hold, an emptiness that could not be filled by the destruction of the bloom. The power that had been unleashed had left something behind. A void. A place where something had been torn away, something that could never be replaced. She had sacrificed everything to destroy the bloom, to stop it from claiming her, but in doing so, she had lost more than she could comprehend. The air grew colder, and a sharp, biting wind swept through the garden, the mist swirling violently around her. It felt as though the entire landscape was shifting, the ground moving beneath her as if it was still alive, still reacting to the force she had unleashed. She took a few unsteady steps forward, but something caught her eye, a figure standing at the edge of the garden. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Harold. He was standing still, facing her, his figure barely visible through the mist, like a ghost emerging from the fog. His face was somber, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected him to be here. She hadn't expected anyone to be here. But there he was, watching her, as if he had been waiting all along. Harold. Evelyn's voice was a hoarse whisper, trembling with exhaustion and confusion. She had come to this moment believing she was alone, that the weight of the bloom had been her burden to carry. But now, standing in front of her was Harold, and something about his presence only deepened the ache inside her. He did not move, did not respond at first. His gaze was fixed on her, cold and distant, like the eyes of a man who had seen too much, a man who knew the terrible cost of meddling with forces beyond his control. "I did what I had to do," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. "I stopped it. I destroyed the bloom. It's over." Harold's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not speak. The silence between them stretched, unbearable and thick, as though there was something unspoken hanging in the air, something that neither of them could fully grasp. "I had to," Evelyn continued. her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't let it take me. I couldn't let it take anyone else. The bloom, it was feeding on me, and now it's gone. I've ended it. But Harold still didn't move. He didn't approach her. His figure remained rooted to the spot, his expression unreadable. You don't understand, do you? He said at last, his voice low, almost tired. There was a sadness in his words, a weight of inevitability. You haven't ended anything. You've only delayed the inevitable. Evelyn felt the floor beneath her feet tremble again. But this time it was not the earth shifting. It was something else, something deeper, like the very foundations of her reality were being altered. She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself. But the ground seemed to give way beneath her, as though the soil itself was collapsing, shifting into a dark abyss. No, she whispered, shaking her head. I destroyed it. The bloom is gone. But even as she spoke the words, a chill swept over her, settling deep in her bones. She could feel it, like an echo of the bloom's power, a residue of darkness lingering just beneath the surface. The mist swirled around her, thicker now, more oppressive, as if it were alive, feeding on her doubt. Harold's face softened for a moment, but it was not the softness of sympathy. It was the softness of someone who had long ago accepted that there were things in this world that could not be undone. You didn't destroy the bloom, Evelyn. You only broke the chain. The connection between the bloom and this world isn't something you can sever with a single act. It's older than that. The bloom is a cycle that cannot be broken, not by you, not by anyone. You can stop it for a while, but it will always return. It's part of the land, part of the curse, and now you've become part of it. Evelyn's chest tightened, her breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? I destroyed it, it's gone. Harold stepped closer then, his expression grim. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering just inches from her arm, and as he did, she saw it, the same dark energy, the same twisted, corrupted force that had once consumed her, now swirling around him. It was faint at first, just a ripple in the air, but it grew stronger with each passing second, until it became impossible to ignore. The ground beneath them trembled again, but this time the earth seemed to split open, as though the land itself were trying to escape the weight of the curse that had been placed upon it. The roots of the bloom, still lingering in the soil, began to twist and writhe, growing, reaching, as if calling out for something, someone. The figure that had been watching from the shadows, now growing clearer, emerged, its face still, obscured by the mist, but unmistakable. It was Gabriel. Evelyn gasped as the image of her brother flickered in front of her, his form translucent, like a ghost caught between two worlds. His eyes were hollow, filled with an emptiness that seemed to swallow her whole. The figure moved toward her, its presence heavy, oppressive, as though the very air around her was suffocating under the weight of the curse. No, Evelyn whispered, stepping back, her hands shaking. No, this isn't possible. I've ended it. You can't escape it, Harold interrupted, his voice soft but full of finality. The bloom feeds on guilt, Evelyn. It feeds on the broken, and you... He paused, his gaze heavy. You are already part of it. The cycle is broken, but the price has been paid. The bloom will never release you, not while your soul is tied to it. The ground cracked open at their feet, and Evelyn fell to her knees, the weight of her actions crashing down on her like a wave. The figure of Gabriel stood before her, his form flickering with the same dark energy that had filled the garden. His eyes, once full of love, were now filled with something far darker. And then Evelyn understood. She hadn't destroyed the bloom. She had merely become its latest sacrifice. Evelyn's world was fading. She could feel it in her bones, in the hollow pit of her stomach, as if the very essence of her being was being drawn away, piece by piece. The garden, once a place of natural beauty, had become something far darker, its vibrant life replaced by decay. The air hung heavy with an oppressive darkness, thick with the sense that something ancient, something beyond understanding, was watching her, waiting for the final moment. She had made her choice. She had tried to destroy the bloom, and in doing so, had only sealed her fate. The cycle was broken, yes, but the bloom was not gone. It was not just a flower, not just a curse. It was something deeper, something tied to her grief, to her guilt. She had thought she could end it, thought she could erase the source of her pain, but instead, the bloom had become part of her. It had taken root in her very soul. The figure of Gabriel, his form now a shadow of his former self, loomed before her, his hollow eyes filled with sorrow and judgment. The garden around her seemed to pulse with the energy of the bloom, its roots twisting beneath the soil, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder still, the light dimming as though the very sun were retreating from the world, leaving only the faintest glow on the horizon. Evelyn had no strength left to resist. She had tried to fight it, had tried to undo the damage she had done. But now, standing here in the garden, she felt the weight of her failure. The bloom had claimed her, and no amount of struggle could change that. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was even worse. It was the silence of inevitability, of something too terrible to ignore. She could feel the bloom's presence inside, her crawling through her veins like a poison, settling deep into the marrow of her bones. She had been its vessel, its sacrifice. The bloom had fed on her grief, on her desperate need to bring back the past. And now, she was its chosen. But as Evelyn stood there, numb and broken, she noticed something strange. The air around her, heavy with the bloom's power, was beginning to shift. The darkness in the garden seemed to tremble, as though the very earth were alive and aware of her presence. The roots beneath her feet writhed and pulsed, but there was something more, something different. The figure of Gabriel flickered, as if his form were unstable, a shadow caught between two worlds. His hollow eyes locked with hers, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something familiar, something human in them. The sorrow faded for just a moment, replaced by something that felt like understanding, as though he, too, had been a part of this, a part of the bloom's endless cycle, and now perhaps he was awakening to it. "No," Evelyn whispered, stepping back, her hands trembling. I never wanted this. I just wanted to bring you back." Gabriel's figure didn't speak, but in that moment, Evelyn felt it. A shift in the air, a change in the pulse of the bloom. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble again, but this time, it was not a tremor of darkness. It was something else. It was a cry, a desperate plea from the garden itself. The bloom was not just feeding on her grief. It was reaching out, trying to communicate, trying to break free. The soil began to churn, the earth shifting violently as though something deep below was struggling to rise. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, her heart racing in her chest. She had to act. She had to end this. But what could she do now? The bloom had already taken root inside her. She had become part of its cycle, and there was no way to undo the damage. She had thought she could fight it, thought she could destroy it, but the bloom had never been something to be destroyed. It was a force, an ancient power tied to the land, tied to grief, to memory, to loss. And now it was too late. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, and a sudden surge of energy shot through her body. She gasped, her body racked with pain as the bloom's power surged through her veins, coursing through her like a torrent. It was both excruciating and electrifying, a rush of energy that filled her, burned her, consumed her. The roots of the bloom wrapped around her, tightening like a noose. In the distance, the tolling of a bell began again, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. The bell was a sound she knew well, one that had echoed in her mind ever since she had first heard it. The bell had always been a warning, a call, a harbinger of what was to come, and now it was a signal. A signal that the cycle was about to begin again. Evelyn screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the rising crescendo of the bell's toll, its sound growing louder and louder until it filled her ears, her mind, her very soul. The ground around her seemed to open, the darkness swallowing everything. She could feel herself being pulled into it, into the heart of the bloom, where the cycle would continue. But as the darkness closed in, as the roots wrapped tighter around her body, Evelyn felt something else, a flicker of light, faint but persistent. It was a memory, a glimmer of something she had lost. It was Gabriel's face, not as it had been when he had died, but as it had been before. The warmth in his eyes, the light in his smile. And in that moment, as the darkness threatened to consume her, Evelyn understood. The bloom, the cycle, the grief, the guilt. It had all been a part of her journey. She could not undo the past, but she could carry it with her. She could hold on to the memory of what she had lost, even as the bloom took everything else. She could choose to let go of the cycle, to let the grief die with the bloom, and to allow something new to take root within her. With a final wrenching breath, Evelyn let go. She let the bloom's power take her, knowing that there would be no return from this, no going back. The cycle was broken, and she had paid the price. The light faded, and the tolling of the bell became the only sound she could hear. And then the darkness took her. Evelyn's body was numb, but her mind was alive with an overwhelming awareness. The earth beneath her seemed to hum with the energy of the bloom, and as she floated between consciousness and unconsciousness, she realized she was no longer standing on solid ground. Her senses had been dulled, and yet the pressure, heavy, consuming, remained, a constant weight pressing on her chest. She felt, more than saw, the transition from the darkness that had enveloped her to something different. It was like slipping into another plane of existence, where the rules of time and space no longer applied. The air around her was thick with fog, and there was an unnatural stillness to it, as though the world was holding its breath. The garden had disappeared. The bloom was gone, but its presence lingered, like the aftertaste of something bitter, something insidious that refused to leave. But as Evelyn's senses began to sharpen, she found herself standing on the edge of an unfamiliar place, a threshold between the physical and the spiritual, between life and death. A light, a cold, ghostly light, flickered in the distance. It was faint at first, like the glow of a dying star, and it beckoned her, calling her toward it with a force she couldn't resist. She had no control over her movements. She walked toward it, the fog swirling around her feet, thick and suffocating. And then she saw it. In the distance, a figure emerged from the mist, a figure she knew all too well. It was Gabriel, but he was different now. His once boyish face had been transformed, hollowed out by the passage of time, by the influence of the bloom, by the cycle that had claimed him and her both. His eyes, those wide, trusting eyes that she remembered from her childhood, were now dark and empty, consumed by the same sorrow that had poisoned her heart. Gabriel. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, but it sounded distant, as though it were coming from another world, another reality entirely. He did not respond. He simply stood there, in the distance, as if waiting for her to approach. His figure seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a wisp of smoke that had been trapped in the fog. With each step she took, the space between them grew shorter, and yet it felt like an eternity. Every movement felt labored, as though she were wading through water, struggling against an unseen force. The fog thickened around her, and she began to realize that the closer she came to Gabriel, the more the world around her seemed to shift, as though the boundaries of her mind and reality were collapsing. By the time she reached him, she was breathless, overwhelmed by the sensation that she was standing in two places at once. The light, the glow, the figure of Gabriel. They all seemed unreal, like an illusion. She reached out to him, her hand trembling with a mixture of longing and fear. But before her fingers could touch him, he faded, disappeared into the fog, leaving behind nothing but the faintest trace of his presence. "No," she cried, her voice thick with desperation. "Gabriel, please!" But he was gone, and in his place stood something else, a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by a dark, flowing hood. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but Evelyn could feel its presence, a presence that was suffocating, terrifying. She could feel it pulling her, dragging her toward it, as though the very weight of it were drawing her into its orbit. She tried to pull away, but it was impossible. The figure stretched out a hand, and Evelyn felt herself compelled to reach toward it, drawn in by a force she could neither comprehend nor resist. She wasn't afraid anymore. She didn't know what was happening, but she no longer had the strength to fight against it. Her body moved of its own accord, her soul weighed down by a sense of inevitability. When the figure's hand touched hers, the air around them seemed to crackle, a surge of energy shooting through her, filling her with an overwhelming sense of recognition. It was like staring into a mirror, but instead of seeing herself, she saw something else. Something that had been buried deep within her. "The price has been paid," the figure spoke, its voice deep, resonant, filled with the weight of centuries. The words felt like a verdict, as if they were being spoken not to her, but for her, a statement that could never be undone. "You have crossed the threshold, Evelyn Holt. You have given all you can give." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice desperate, shaking. "What have I given?" The figure's hand tightened around hers, its grip cold and unyielding. "You have offered yourself. You have surrendered to the bloom. And in doing so, you have entered the cycle. You are its latest offering. And now, you will join those who have come before you." The words hit her like a physical blow, her body trembling under the weight of the revelation. The bloom had claimed her. It had never been about saving Gabriel, about reversing death. It was always about this, about her becoming part of the bloom's cycle, feeding it with her grief, her pain, her loss. The cycle would never end, and now she was bound to it, tied to its insatiable hunger for eternity. "No," Evelyn whispered, shaking her head, her breath ragged. "I can't be a part of it. I can't. I can't be trapped like this." The figure stepped closer, and Evelyn felt the weight of its presence pressing against her chest, suffocating her. "There is no escape, Evelyn. You made the choice long ago. You sought to bring back what was lost, and in doing so, you sealed your fate." The ground beneath them seemed to shift again, and Evelyn fell to her knees, her heart pounding in her chest. The fog swirled around her, thick and dark, as though the world itself was closing in. She had given everything, but it wasn't enough. The bloom had taken her, body and soul, and there was no escape from it now. As the figure raised its hand, Evelyn felt the final pull, the final surrender. The bloom had claimed its latest offering. The price had been paid, and now there was nothing left but the endless cycle. Her vision blurred as the darkness swallowed her whole, and in that moment, Evelyn knew there was no turning back. The darkness that enveloped Evelyn was unlike anything she had ever known. It was not simply an absence of light, but a vast, suffocating emptiness, a silence that stretched on forever. She could no longer feel the ground beneath her feet, no longer feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She was weightless, suspended between two worlds, one that she had known and one that she had never fully understood. The figure in front of her, still cloaked in shadow, loomed like an immovable force, its presence stretching across the space around her, cold and unyielding. The air had thickened with a strange, charged energy, and Evelyn could feel it crawling through her, wrapping itself around her soul, binding her in ways she couldn't comprehend. The figure's form remained silent, watching her, its dark, faceless hood looming over her like a judgment, a reckoning. "You have made your offering," the figure intoned, its voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "The price has been paid, but the bloom will not release you. Not yet." Evelyn's body trembled, a strange sensation of both power and terror flooding through her. "What do you mean?" she gasped, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper against the vastness of the void around her. "I did everything you asked. You are not free," the figure interrupted, its tone now more commanding, its voice growing louder, more resonant. "The bloom is not a force to be controlled. It is not something you can destroy. It is not simply a curse. It is the cycle of existence itself, the life, the death, the rebirth. It feeds on loss, on the broken, on the things that cannot be undone. And now you are bound to it." Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of the figure's words crushing her chest. Bound. She had tried so desperately to escape, to undo her past, to fix the damage she had done. But in her attempt to reclaim what she had lost, she had sealed her fate. The bloom had claimed her, not just as a vessel for its power, but as a part of its endless cycle. "I can't," she whispered, a lump forming in her throat. "I can't be a part of it. I can't carry this weight forever." The figure's voice softened, almost pitying, but still cold and unyielding. "You were never meant to escape, Evelyn Holt. You were meant to witness, to understand, to become part of the endless cycle. The bloom does not take without giving. It gives the power of life and death, but it demands an offering in return." Her body was shaking with the sheer force of the realization. She had never truly understood the full extent of what the bloom was. It was not just a plant, not just a curse. It was something much deeper, a force that was tied to the very fabric of existence. And now she was part of that force, trapped within it, a player in a game that had been in motion long before her birth, long before Gabriel had died, long before she had made her fateful choice. "No," she said again, more forcefully this time, her hands gripping at the space around her. "I won't accept this. I won't accept being bound to it." The figure's shadowy form shifted, and for the first time, Evelyn thought she saw a flicker of something, maybe even a spark of something close to emotion in the figure's presence, the faintest shift in the atmosphere. "A breath, if you could call it that. There is no choice," it replied, its voice soft but tinged with something else, something that could have been regret, or perhaps resignation. "You are part of the bloom now. You are its witness and its keeper of grief." Evelyn felt the ground begin to shift beneath her feet once more, the sense of weightlessness increasing, as though she were being drawn deeper into the void. She could feel it now, the cycle, the endless loop that she had entered. It was as though her very soul was tethered to the land, to the earth itself, forever bound to the pain, to the suffering, to the loss. "You must understand, Evelyn," the figure continued, "what you have done is irreversible, but this is not the end. It is a beginning. The last word hung in the air, charged with a sinister finality. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She could feel it now, the full weight of the bloom's power. The darkness wasn't simply surrounding her anymore. It was within her. It was her, and she was it. The boundaries of her identity were dissolving, and she couldn't remember where she ended and the bloom began. "You will carry this. Weight, this burden, as I have," the figure's voice whispered, drawing her back from the growing panic that threatened to consume her. "You will guide others to the bloom, just as you were guided. You will be its keeper, its witness, its protector. You will be the one to witness the cycle that must continue. The dead will walk again, the past will bleed into the present, and you will stand as a witness to it all." Evelyn stumbled, feeling a sudden sharp pain in her chest, as if something had pierced her heart. She gasped, clutching at the air, her breath shallow, frantic. "No! I can't do this, I can't—" But the figure's presence only grew stronger. The pressure in the air intensified, and Evelyn felt her limbs go weak, her body collapsing, in on itself, as if the weight of her own grief had become a physical force, pushing her down. The shadow of Gabriel flickered in the distance once more, his hollow eyes staring into her, silently accusing her. The agony of her failure was raw. "Exposed, you will bear the weight of the bloom," the figure said softly, its voice now unmistakably final. "You will carry its offering, but it is not all pain. There will be moments, brief moments, when you will feel a sense of rebirth, the warmth of new life. And you will understand, Evelyn Holt, why the cycle must continue." And with that, Evelyn felt the sharp, painful tug of the earth. She gasped, her eyes opening wide as the ground beneath her shifted once more, the garden around her twisting, reforming, as if the bloom itself were awakening with her. The mist began to part, and Evelyn saw for the briefest moment a flicker of light, warm, golden, a glimpse of a world she had lost, and then it was gone. Her vision blurred, and the weight of the bloom's influence settled deeper into her soul. The ritual had begun. The cycle had not been broken. It had only been reborn, and Evelyn was now part of it. Forever. Evelyn awoke in a place that wasn't quite a place at all. Her senses felt heightened, sharpened, yet her body was disconnected, as if she were floating in a space between sleep and wakefulness. The oppressive weight of the bloom still hung over her, its power coursing through her veins, a permanent mark on her very being. She could feel it in her chest, like a constant pulsing ache, like the slow beat of a heart that was not her own. It had taken root inside her, had entwined itself with her very soul. She was no longer just Evelyn Holt. She was something else now. She was the bloom's keeper, the keeper of its curse. The fog was thick, dense with an almost tangible sorrow, but it did not swallow her. Instead, it seemed to part just enough to reveal a path, a winding, dimly lit trail that stretched out before her. She stood at its entrance, the ground beneath her feet soft and uneven, like freshly turned earth. The air was cold, but not in the way it had been before. It was an emptiness that chilled her to the core, like the remnants of a long-lost warmth that could never be reclaimed. Behind her, the garden was silent. The remnants of the bloom, the twisted vines, the blackened soil, lay dormant, but Evelyn could feel their presence. She knew that they were still there, deep beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when they would rise again. The path before her beckoned, dark and inviting, and she had no choice but to follow it. With every step, she felt the weight of her new reality settling around her. She had tried to escape the cycle, tried to sever her connection to the bloom, but it had only grown stronger, its power more insidious. She was bound to it now, as its witness, its keeper, and whatever remnants of her old self remained had been swallowed by the vastness of the curse. The path ahead was not straight. It twisted and turned, snaking through the dense fog like a living thing, winding through a landscape that seemed to shift with each step she took. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, of breaking free from the cycle that had ensnared her, but deep down she knew it was futile. The bloom had already claimed her, and there was no going back. As she walked, the fog began to shift, and Evelyn found herself standing before a doorway. It appeared out of nowhere, framed by twisted, gnarled trees, their branches reaching toward her like skeletal hands. The doorway was made of stone, cracked and weathered, as if it had stood there for centuries untouched by time. Its surface was covered in strange symbols, runes she did not understand, their meanings lost to history. But as she gazed at them, a familiar feeling crept into her chest. They were not just markings, they were warnings. Warnings she had ignored, warnings she could not escape. The air around the doorway hummed with energy, a subtle vibration that pulsed like the heartbeat of the bloom itself. As Evelyn approached, she could feel the weight of its presence growing, pressing against her, urging her forward. "You have been chosen," a voice said, and Evelyn startled, her body tensing at the sound. The voice was familiar, but it was not her own. It was deeper, ancient, filled with the power of centuries. She turned toward it, but no one stood in front of her. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the air, filling her ears with its cold, relentless tone. "You are the witness now. You will watch the cycle unfold, and you will guide the bloom to those who are ready. You will lead them through the threshold, and you will show them the way." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a blow. She wasn't just bound to the bloom, she was its herald, its guide. She was no longer just a victim of the curse. She was the instrument of its will. "Why?" she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of grief and rage. "Why me?" The voice did not answer at first. Instead, the fog around her seemed to grow heavier, swirling with an almost tangible presence. The path ahead shifted, changing as though the world itself was rearranging, folding in on itself. The figure of Gabriel appeared again, this time clearer, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with an emptiness that made her stomach turn. "You are the keeper of grief," the figure said, his voice cold, distant, a shadow of the brother she had once known. "You were always meant to carry the weight. This is your burden now." "No!" Evelyn cried out, her voice breaking. "I didn't choose this. I never chose this." Gabriel's figure did not move, did not speak. But Evelyn felt the ground beneath her feet shift again, and she realized that the fog had thickened, swirling faster now, pulling her into its center. The earth was alive with the energy of the bloom, and it was as if the very land around her was breathing, growing, shifting in response to her presence. "This is not a choice," the voice echoed again. "It is your fate. You are bound to the bloom, and the cycle must continue. You will watch as others fall, as others seek the same path you once sought, and you will show them the way." The fog thickened, wrapping around Evelyn like a shroud, the air growing colder with every passing moment. The symbols on the doorway seemed to glow faintly, and she realized with a sickening clarity that they were not just runes. They were the map of the bloom's power, the very blueprint of the curse that had haunted her family for generations. She had always thought she could outrun it. She had always thought she could change things, make things right. But the bloom had always been a part of her, and now she would carry it forever. The fog pressed in on her, the symbols on the doorway swirling as if they were coming alive. The presence of the bloom, its power, grew stronger until it filled the entire space, suffocating her with its hunger. And then, with a final breathless gasp, Evelyn stepped through the threshold. The world went dark. Evelyn's body slammed into an unseen force as she passed through the threshold. It was as though her very soul was being torn in two, stretched between realms, between the world she had known and the one she was now forced to inhabit. The weight of the bloom's power wrapped around her like chains, pulling her deeper into the unknown. It was suffocating, but it was also oddly familiar. The tension in the air, the thick, oppressive darkness, it felt like home now, a place she had come to know too well. Her mind reeled, a blur of images, sounds, and feelings that crashed over her in an overwhelming wave. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, or what had brought her here. All she knew was the overwhelming sense of loss and sorrow that filled her chest, the constant gnawing presence of the bloom's power coursing through her veins. The darkness slowly began to recede, and Evelyn blinked, her vision clearing. She was no longer standing in the garden, nor in the fog-filled threshold she had just crossed. Instead, she found herself in a vast, empty space, one that stretched out endlessly in every direction. The air was thick and stale, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else, something rotten. It was the smell of decay, of things long dead, of memories that had been buried and forgotten. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and uneven, like the remnants of an old graveyard. The earth was dark and barren, as though it had not seen life in centuries. Above her, the sky was a dull, muted grey, the sun hidden behind clouds that seemed to stretch on forever. The silence here was absolute, suffocating, and Evelyn felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She took a step forward, her legs unsteady beneath her. The moment her foot touched the ground, the soil shifted, sending a ripple of dark energy through the air. It was as though the earth itself was reacting to her presence, and with every step she took, the air grew colder, heavier. Evelyn felt a familiar pull, a tug in her chest that reminded her of the bloom. She knew what this place was, even though she couldn't fully understand it. It was a threshold, a border between the living and the dead. She was standing in the space where the curse was born, where the bloom had first taken root. This was where it all began, the beginning of the cycle she had now become part of. The whispers started again, soft at first, like a breeze carrying distant voices, but quickly growing louder. They were not just the voices of the dead. They were the voices of those who had been claimed by the bloom, those who had crossed the threshold before her, those who had made the same fatal mistake. She could hear their cries, their desperate pleas, echoing through the air. They were all trapped here, like her, bound to the bloom, part of its endless cycle. "No," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with fear and disbelief. "I can't be here. I can't be like them." But the bloom was already inside her, its power already coursing through her veins. She had become one of them, a witness, a keeper, a part of the cycle. The voices of the lost souls grew louder, pressing in on her, filling her mind with their sorrow, their anger, their pain. She could feel them, feel their suffering as if it were her own. As the voices continued to grow in volume, the air around her began to shift. The space she was standing in seemed to warp, the ground beneath her feet vibrating with a low hum. It was a familiar hum, one that she had felt when the bloom first awakened, when the ground had trembled beneath her as she had reached for it, hoping to reclaim what had been lost. But this time, the hum was different. It was deeper, more powerful, and as the vibration grew stronger, the ground began to crack, splitting open before her. Evelyn stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The earth was splitting open, and from the cracks, tendrils of darkness began to rise. They slithered and twisted through the air like serpents, reaching toward her, toward the very core of her being. The roots of the bloom were not just in the ground. They were everywhere, beneath the surface, reaching out to claim everything in their path. She tried to move, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift with every step. The bloom's power was suffocating her, tightening its grip. With every passing second, the roots twisted through the air, their thorns glistening in the dim light, and Evelyn realized with horror that they were not just reaching for her, they were feeding on her. The voices of the lost souls became louder, their cries of anguish drowning out everything else. It was as though the entire world was closing in on her, and the darkness was consuming everything she had once known. She had tried to stop the bloom, tried to break the cycle, but in doing so, she had only become part of it. She had been drawn into its grasp, and now there was no escaping it. And then she felt it, a sharp, searing pain deep in her chest. It wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that tore at the very fabric of her soul. The bloom's power was pulling her apart, unraveling her from the inside out. It was feeding on her grief, her guilt, her loss, and with every passing second, it grew stronger. "No!" Evelyn cried out, clutching her chest as the pain intensified. "I won't let you take me." But the bloom was already taking her. She could feel it in her bones, in the very core of her being. The darkness was consuming her, and she was powerless to stop it. The figure, the one she had seen earlier, the one that had guided her here, emerged from the shadows, its presence looming over her like a dark cloud. It was not the figure of Gabriel. It was something else, something ancient. It was the embodiment of the curse, the one who had always been tied to the bloom, the one who had always been its keeper, and now it was standing before her, watching her, waiting for her to accept her fate. "You cannot escape it," the figure said, its voice deep and echoing through the space. "The bloom has claimed you, and now you will bear the weight of its curse. You are part of it. You always have been." Evelyn's heart broke as the figure's words sank in. She had tried to fight it. She had tried to undo the damage she had done, but there was no escape. The bloom had taken root in her soul, and now there was nothing left but to witness the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth. With a final, agonizing breath, Evelyn collapsed to her knees, the darkness consuming her completely. The figure watched, its eyes empty as the bloom's power took her, body, soul, and spirit, locking her into the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth. And so, the curse continued. Evelyn could feel nothing. Not the weight of the earth, nor the pulse of the bloom. There was no air, no sound. Only an endless, profound silence, one that swallowed everything she once knew. It was as if she were floating in an abyss, drifting away from time itself, caught between worlds, trapped in a limbo where the past and present had merged into a single, unending moment. Her mind was a haze, faint, fleeting memories of a life once lived, a life full of joy and love. Gabriel's laughter, the warmth of her mother's hand, the gentle touch of her father's embrace. But these memories were like the faintest flickers, distant stars that burned bright for a moment only to fade into darkness. They could no longer reach her, could no longer pull her back into the world she had once inhabited. The pain was gone, at least the physical pain. But Evelyn still felt the hollow ache deep within her chest, where something crucial had been lost. There was no light, no warmth, just a vast, empty space where the bloom's power had once coursed through her, twisting her heart into something unrecognizable. The cycle had not just consumed her body, it had consumed her essence. Then, slowly, impossibly, the silence began to shift. It started as a distant whisper, faint and elusive at first. But the whisper grew louder, sharper, and with it came an unmistakable pressure, an invisible force that wrapped itself around her mind, pulling her back, forcing her to awaken. Evelyn's breath caught, but she did not gasp for air. Instead, the very concept of air, of life, began to seep back into her. It was a hollow return, as though something that had been ripped away was now being pushed back into place, unnatural and painful, but inevitable. A jolt of realization surged through her, and with it a sharp, agonizing pang of recognition. The bloom was not done with her. It had only begun. She opened her eyes, though she wasn't sure when she had closed them, or how long she had been in this place of waiting. The world around her was a hazy blur, the light muted and disorienting. The ground beneath her was uneven, cold and damp. She was no longer in the ethereal darkness, but in a space that seemed to exist just on the edge of reality. The air was heavy with the smell of earth, decayed leaves, and something else. Something rancid. Something she could not quite place. The ground around her was cracked, as if the very earth had been torn open, but it was still solid, still holding. The sky overhead was a dull grey, as if the sun had abandoned the world, leaving only a shadowed expanse above. A single, low-hanging mist stretched across the landscape, obscuring her view but not quite hiding what lay ahead. She moved to stand, but her legs felt weak, unsteady beneath her. The world spun briefly, and for a moment she thought she might fall, but she caught herself on a nearby stone, rough and cold beneath her fingertips. She pushed herself up and looked around, her eyes narrowing against the overwhelming fog. The space felt so familiar, but so wrong. The earth trembled beneath her feet, a low, unsettling vibration that seemed to resonate from deep below the surface. She could hear it, a distant rumble, like the growl of an ancient beast stirring from its slumber. The bloom was still there somewhere. She could feel it, as though its roots had burrowed deeper into her than she could have imagined, wrapping themselves around her heart, her soul. "You're awake," a voice said, soft but clear, cutting through the haze. Evelyn turned toward the source, her heart leaping in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure before her, standing just beyond the mist. It was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it at first. Then a wave of recognition hit her. It was Harold, but he was different. His eyes, once full of concern and kindness, were now hollow, empty in the way that only someone who had been touched by the bloom could be. His form shimmered, flickering like a half-remembered dream. And yet, he was there, as real as she was. "You," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "You were never gone?" Harold stepped forward, but his movements were slow, hesitant, as though he was still unsure of his place in the world. His face, once alive with warmth, now looked gaunt, pale, his features drawn and harsh, as if the bloom had siphoned the life from him the same way it had from her. "I was never truly gone," Harold replied, his voice hollow, distant. "None of us are, Evelyn, not really." Evelyn's chest tightened. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Harold's eyes softened, but there was something sad in them, something resigned. "You've crossed over. You've become part of the bloom's cycle, just like me. We are the witnesses now, the keepers of grief. The cycle can't be broken, Evelyn. It's a part of you. It always has been. It's in the land, in the soil, in the roots that reach for the sky." Evelyn stumbled back, her heart racing. "I don't understand. I thought I destroyed it. I thought I—" "You didn't destroy it," Harold interrupted gently. "You can't destroy the bloom. You can't destroy what has always been a part of you. It feeds on grief, on loss, and it feeds on you now. But that's not the worst of it." She looked at him, confused and desperate for answers. "What's the worst of it?" Harold stepped closer, his gaze intense and knowing. The worst of it is that the bloom's power doesn't just take life, it gives life too. In exchange for your soul, for your sacrifice, it brings the dead back. But they're not truly alive. They're the ones who have fallen before you, the ones who never escaped. The ground trembled again. But this time, it was different. The tremor spread through the earth like a pulse, alive, breathing, waiting. Evelyn could feel the weight of the bloom's power surging, its roots stretching through the soil, as if it were awakening from a deep slumber. The air shifted, becoming thick with energy, as though the space around her was alive with anticipation. And then she saw it, emerging from the mist, the first of the dead. Gabriel, but not the Gabriel she had once known. This version was different. His eyes were clouded, his face pale and gaunt. He was the same, but he was wrong. His presence was haunting, unnerving. The life that had once burned in him had been extinguished, replaced with something far darker. Gabriel, Evelyn whispered, taking a step toward him, her voice barely audible, her heart aching with longing and fear. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, his empty eyes fixed on her, a silent testament to the power of the bloom. Slowly, the other figures began to emerge from the mist, lost souls who had crossed over, who had been brought back by the bloom's power. Each one was a shadow of their former selves, their faces empty, their eyes hollow with the same curse that had claimed her. Harold stood by her side, watching her, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "They're all here, Evelyn. The bloom has brought them back, but they're not truly alive. They exist in the space between life and death, trapped in the cycle. And now, you will guide them, just as I have guided you." Evelyn's heart broke as she looked at the figures around her. Lost souls trapped in the endless cycle of the bloom. She had tried to stop it, to break free, but in the end, she had become part of it. She had become its keeper, its witness. She would never escape. The bloom had claimed her, and now she was its servant. Evelyn's legs felt heavy as she stood there, surrounded by the lost souls, the echoes of the past. The weight of the bloom's power still lingered within her, coursing through her veins like fire. She could feel the endless pull of the cycle, tugging at her, urging her to move forward. But what was forward now? What was left for her to do? She had thought that by destroying the bloom, by sacrificing herself, she could escape the grasp of its dark power. But the truth was far worse. The bloom had never been something to destroy. It was not a curse to be undone. It was a force of nature, a cycle of existence, and Evelyn had unwittingly sealed herself into its eternal loop. Gabriel stood before her, his eyes hollow and empty. His presence was a stark reminder of the price she had paid. The bloom had not returned him to her as she had hoped. No, this was not the Gabriel she had once known. This was a shadow, a twisted echo of the boy she had loved, now bound to the same cycle of death and rebirth that she was trapped in. "Why?" Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "Why is this happening? Why can't I escape?" The wind shifted around them, and the mist thickened, obscuring the figures that stood just beyond the edge of her vision. The souls, the ones who had already been claimed by the bloom, were silent. But Evelyn could feel them, their presence like a weight pressing against her chest. They were waiting, watching, as though they knew the path she had to take. The path she had no choice but to follow. "It's not about escape," Harold's voice cut through her thoughts, soft yet firm. She hadn't noticed him standing beside her, but there he was, his figure flickering in and out of the mist, his face still pale and drawn. He too was a shadow of the man she had once known, a soul forever bound to the bloom. Evelyn turned, To him, her heart aching with the realization that there was nothing left to hold on to. "What do you mean?" "I don't want this. I don't want to be a part of this cycle. I can't bear it." Harold's gaze was full of sorrow. "You already are, Evelyn. You've always been. The bloom is not just a curse. It's the balance, the life and death, the grief and the rebirth. It exists to remind us of what we've lost, of what we cannot undo. You can't escape it. You're its keeper now, just as I was, just as Gabriel will be." Evelyn's mind spun. Keeper. The weight of the word hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just bound to the bloom. She wasn't just a victim of it. She was its guide, its witness, its protector. She was the one who would lead others to their fate, just as Harold had once led her, just as Gabriel would now be led. "No," Evelyn choked, stepping back, shaking her head. "I don't want to be a part of this. I can't be the one to carry this burden." "You don't have a choice," Harold said gently, his eyes meeting hers. "None of us do. Once the bloom marks you, once it takes root inside you, there is no turning back. But you're not alone, Evelyn. You'll never be alone in this." The words should have comforted her, but they didn't. They only deepened the despair that already gripped her heart. She wanted to scream, to fight, to tear the cycle apart with every ounce of her being. But the bloom's power was too great. It was part of the land, part of the world, part of her. She could feel it gnawing at her, always, even as she tried to push it down. She turned back to Gabriel, whose hollow eyes followed her every movement. He was not the brother she had once known. He was not the person who had been torn from her by grief and death. He was a shadow now, a lost soul trapped in the cycle, just as she was. And soon, more would join him. More would be pulled into the bloom's grasp, and she, Evelyn Holt, would be the one to guide them to their fate. Tears stung her eyes as the weight of it all came crashing down on her. She had once dreamed of a life free of pain, free of the constant ache of loss. She had longed for a way to bring Gabriel back, to fix what had been broken. But now she understood. The bloom had never been about healing. It had always been about accepting what was lost, embracing the inevitable cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Harold reached out to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was cold, but there was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet understanding. "It's not forever, Evelyn. You will guide them, but there will be moments of peace. The bloom doesn't just take, it gives too. It brings the lost back, but not as they were. They are reborn in a sense. They find purpose in the cycle." Evelyn's chest tightened, the words reverberating in her mind. "Reborn," she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "But not as they were. What do they become?" "They become part of the cycle," Harold replied, his voice soft but unwavering. "The bloom gives them purpose in death. It gives them a place in the world they never had before. They return as witnesses, as keepers of the lost." Evelyn couldn't bring herself to look at Gabriel again. The idea of him, of the brother she had loved, now bound to the cycle, trapped as a witness, a servant to the bloom, filled her with an unbearable sense of guilt. Was this really what she had wanted? Was this really the life she had chosen for him? But she knew the truth now. There was no choice. Not really. The bloom had taken them all. Taken her, taken Gabriel, and now it would continue endlessly, feeding on the grief and the loss, drawing in new souls to fill the void it had created. She was part of it now. She could never escape. The mist swirled around her, and Evelyn turned away from Gabriel, her eyes filled with the sorrow of understanding. She had crossed a threshold that couldn't be undone. And now, there was only One thing left to do. She had to guide them. With one last look at Harold, who stood beside her, a flicker of understanding passing between them, Evelyn took the first step on the path. She could feel the weight of the bloom's power inside her, pushing her forward, pulling her toward the future she had never wanted, the future that had been decided long before she had ever known the bloom. And as she stepped forward, the mist parted, revealing the next soul, the next lost soul who would need her guidance, who would need the keeper of the bloom to lead them into their fate. The cycle had begun again. Evelyn's steps were slow, hesitant, as though the weight of the bloom's power pressed down on her shoulders with every move. Each breath felt heavier than the last, the air thick with the remnants of the curse, a constant reminder that she was no longer herself. She had crossed the threshold. She had entered the endless cycle, the place where souls came and went, where life and death bled together in an eternal loop. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, twisting and winding in ways that didn't seem natural, as if it were alive, breathing with the weight of all the lost souls that had passed through it before. Every step she took seemed to echo in the hollow space, like a faint, distant reminder of something long forgotten. Her legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last, pulling her deeper into the cycle she had once thought she could escape. The figure of Harold walked beside her, his silent presence a constant weight. He had become a part of the curse, just as she had. And now she was following in his footsteps, guiding the souls who crossed the threshold, leading them into the darkness, showing them the way to their new existence. "How long have you been here, Harold?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking the silence that had followed them since they began walking. Harold's gaze remained fixed ahead, his eyes empty and distant, as though he were staring at something far beyond the mist. "Longer than I can remember," he replied softly, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow. "Time doesn't matter here. We live in the space between life and death, in the moment where everything that once was fades away." Evelyn looked at him, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, his very presence a ghost of the man he had once been. He was not the man she had known. He was something else now, something born from the same grief and despair that had consumed her. He had become a witness to the bloom, just as she was, caught in the endless cycle of loss and rebirth. "But this wasn't what you wanted," Evelyn said, her voice low. "This isn't the way it was supposed to be. We were supposed to live, to move on, to heal, not this. Not this." Harold turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze with eyes that seemed both weary and resigned. "It never was about what we wanted, Evelyn. It was about the bloom, about the cycle. We never had a choice in this, not really. The bloom takes what it needs and it gives in return. Life, death, rebirth. It's all one thing, all part of the same endless loop." Evelyn's heart twisted with the weight of his words. The bloom, with its insatiable hunger, had taken everything from her. Gabriel, her life, her hope. And now it had taken her as well, leaving her to wander this endless path with the other lost souls. She had once thought she could break free from it, that she could find a way to escape the curse. But now, as she walked the fog-laden path, she understood the terrible truth. She was bound to the bloom just as Harold was, just as every soul that passed through this place was. The mist began to part as they continued walking, and Evelyn's eyes widened when she saw the first figure ahead of them. Another lost soul, another being drawn into the cycle. The figure was faint at first, barely a shadow in the fog, but as they drew closer it became clearer. A man, disheveled and broken, his eyes wide with terror, his hands pressed against his chest, as though trying to hold himself together. He looked lost, confused, trapped in a nightmare he could not wake from. The moment Evelyn's gaze met his, the man's eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. His mouth moved, but no sound escaped. He was trapped. In a world between worlds, unable to speak, unable to escape. "Is he?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Harold nodded slowly. "Another soul, drawn into the cycle. He has lost his way. He doesn't yet understand what's happened to him, but he will." Evelyn's heart ached as she watched the man, his face contorted in anguish, his every movement a reflection of the pain and confusion that had taken hold of him. She wanted to help him, to tell him that it wasn't too late, that there was still a way out, but she knew better. There was no way out. The bloom had already claimed him, just as it had claimed her. The man stumbled toward them, his movements jerky, as though he were trying to piece himself together, trying to hold on to whatever remained of his old life. But his eyes, their emptiness, their hollowness, told a different story. He was already lost. The bloom had taken him, and now he was just another piece in its eternal puzzle. Evelyn watched as Harold moved toward the man, his steps slow and deliberate. He reached out a hand, placing it gently on the man's shoulder. The man flinched, his body shuddering at the touch, but then he froze, his eyes locking onto Harold's. There was a strange, eerie stillness between them, and in that moment, Evelyn could almost feel the connection, the bond that had been formed between Harold and this soul, between the keeper and the lost. "You're here now," Harold said softly, his voice carrying an almost mournful tone. "And you will walk the path, just as I did, just as Evelyn will." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten at his words. This was it. This was her new reality. She was a guide, a keeper, a witness to the endless procession of souls drawn into the bloom's grasp. She had no choice but to lead them, to show them the way, to help them understand what had happened to them. The man began to speak then, his words broken and frenzied, his voice a desperate whisper that reached Evelyn's ears like the wind through dry leaves. "Where am I? What happened? I don't understand. I was..." "Shh," Harold said, cutting him off gently, his voice laced with a quiet sorrow. "You are here. You are part of the bloom now, and you will walk with us, just as I did, just as Evelyn will." The man's body seemed to stiffen, as though the words were sinking into him, pulling him into the reality he could no longer escape. Evelyn felt a sharp pang in her chest as she watched the transformation, the man's confusion shifting into acceptance, as though the bloom's power were beginning to take hold of him. And as the man slowly turned to follow Harold and Evelyn, she realized the terrible truth. There would be no end to this. The souls would continue to come, drawn by the bloom's power, each one lost, confused, desperate for answers, and she would be there to lead them, to guide them into the endless cycle that she herself was now trapped in. The bloom had not only claimed her, it had claimed them all, and there was no escape. The path before Evelyn stretched endlessly, winding and bending through the mist, through the darkness that had become her world. Her feet moved instinctively, carrying her forward through the endless fog, past the souls that had joined the bloom, each one a hollow, tortured echo of what they once were. They followed her now, drawn to her as though she were their beacon, their guide. She couldn't help them, she couldn't save them, but she could lead them, and that was all she was allowed to do. Harold walked beside her, his presence still, a silent reminder of the cycle they were both bound to. But he was no longer the man she had known. He had become something else, something born from the bloom itself, a keeper, just as she had become. The weight of his transformation was visible in the way he carried himself, his eyes distant, his body now as empty as the souls they guided. She could see it in the slow, methodical way he moved, as though he were no longer fully present in the world. There was a moment, though, when Evelyn could see a flicker of something in him, something faint, something human. His eyes softened as they met hers, and for a brief instant, the man he had been, the man who had once cared for her, seemed to return. But it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had come, replaced once again by the emptiness that was now part of him. "Is this what it's always been like?" Evelyn asked, her voice hollow as though the words came from somewhere far away. She wasn't sure if she was asking Harold or herself. Harold did not answer immediately. The fog parted ahead of them and they passed through, stepping into a larger clearing. It was a space Evelyn had seen before, though she had never been this close to it. The ground was marked with symbols, runes she recognized from the place where it all began, where the bloom had first taken root. The symbols were inscribed in the dirt, faded but still unmistakable, like the forgotten remnants of an ancient ritual. She could feel the energy here just below the surface, stirring like something waking from a deep slumber. "It wasn't always like this," Harold said at last, his voice quiet, almost regretful. "But the longer you remain in the cycle, the harder it becomes to remember what you were. The bloom doesn't just take your life, it takes your past, your identity. It erases what came before." Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. She had been so desperate to return to the past, to undo her grief, to reclaim what had been lost. But she understood now that the past was gone. It was nothing more than a fading dream, a shadow that could never be grasped again. The bloom had consumed her, and in doing so, it had erased everything she once was. "Is that why you stopped?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling with the question she had long avoided. "Is that why you became a part of this? Because the bloom took you too?" Harold didn't answer right away. He merely continued walking, his eyes fixed ahead, as if he was staring at something far beyond the symbols on the ground, something far out of reach. The silence stretched between them, but Evelyn couldn't break it. She had to know. "I didn't stop," Harold said, his voice low. "I gave in. I accepted it, Evelyn. I didn't have a choice. You'll see soon enough. The more you fight it, the harder it becomes. The bloom is the cycle. It's everything and nothing. And once you're in it, you can't leave." Evelyn's heart sank. She had known deep down that there was no way out. She had tried to fight it, to defy it, but the bloom had already claimed her, and now she was bound to it, just like Harold, just like every soul that passed through this place. As they reached the center of the clearing, Evelyn stopped, her eyes falling to the ground. There, beneath the symbols, a faint light flickered, as though something was buried deep beneath the earth. She could feel it, a pull, a tug, like the bloom was calling her to something important, something that could change everything. Harold stopped beside her, and for the first time his voice carried a trace of something deeper, something more urgent. "You feel it too, don't you?" Evelyn nodded slowly. The air around them had shifted, becoming charged with an unnatural energy. The bloom's presence was stronger here, pulsing through the ground like a living thing. The symbols on the earth glowed faintly, as if they were responding to the power stirring below. "This is where it ends," Harold said quietly. "This is where the bloom has been waiting." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She bent down, brushing her fingers against the earth. The symbols beneath her fingertips seemed to resonate with her touch, and she felt a sudden surge of power course through her, a rush of energy that threatened to overwhelm her. And then she saw it. A figure rising from the earth, its shape slowly becoming clearer as it emerged from the soil. It was Gabriel, but not Gabriel as she had known him. This version of him was different, older, more twisted. His body was pale, his features distorted, his eyes glowing with a faint, eerie light. He was no longer just a victim of the bloom. He was its servant, its protector, a part of the cycle that would never end. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. He was here, standing before her, but he was not the brother she had once loved. He was something else, something that had been born from the bloom's endless hunger. "Gabriel," Evelyn whispered, her voice shaking. "What have you become?" Gabriel's eyes met hers, but there was no recognition in them, no warmth. Only the cold, empty gaze of a soul lost to the cycle. His lips parted, but instead of speaking, he only extended his hand toward her, as though beckoning her forward. The earth trembled again, and the power of the bloom surged through Evelyn, pulling her toward him, pulling her toward the cycle she could no longer escape. Harold's voice was low, almost mournful. "This is your choice now, Evelyn. You can join them. You can take your place as the keeper of the bloom, as its witness. Or you can try to break free. But know this, you will lose everything. The bloom does not give second chances." Evelyn's heart raced as the choice before her loomed like an insurmountable wall. Could she truly choose to be part of the bloom, to become one of the lost, forever trapped in its endless cycle? Or was there another way, a way to escape it all, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had left? The figure of Gabriel reached out again, his hand now almost touching hers, and Evelyn realized that this was the moment when the bloom would either claim her completely or release her forever. The choice was hers, and as she looked at Gabriel, her brother, lost to the cycle, she knew that whatever she chose, it would come with a price. Evelyn stood at the crossroads of eternity. The choice lay before her like an ancient, gnarled gate, the threshold to a path that had been laid long before her birth. The bloom's power thrummed through the ground beneath her feet, resonating through her very being, its pull undeniable. Her mind screamed in defiance. Her heart waged a silent war between the desire to escape the curse and the knowledge that escaping it might mean losing everything she had left. Gabriel's outstretched hand trembled before her, the hollow eyes that had once been full of love now empty, an abyss that threatened to swallow her whole. The very figure she had once yearned to see, now a reflection of all that she had lost, stood before her, not as a brother, but as a servant of the bloom, bound to the same endless cycle of death, rebirth, and eternal torment. Would I join him? Evelyn wondered, staring at the ghost of the boy she had once known, lost forever to the bloom's insatiable hunger. He was no longer a person in the way she remembered. The bloom had twisted him, as it had twisted Harold, as it had twisted her into something bound to the eternal cycle of grief and loss. A cold wind stirred the fog, a whisper of the bloom's presence that threatened to drown her in its sorrow. The earth seemed to echo with the voices of the lost souls who had wandered these paths before, their cries rising like a chorus of despair. Every breath Evelyn took seemed to carry the weight of their pain, their eternal struggle. She could feel it now. This place, this cursed land, was both a graveyard and a womb. Life and death had merged here. The bloom was both the creator and destroyer of existence, an endless cycle that neither began nor ended. "I don't want this," Evelyn whispered, the words breaking from her lips like a sob. "I never wanted this." Gabriel's figure flickered in the mist, his outstretched hand still waiting, still beckoning her forward. The air around her pulsed with the weight of his silent plea, as though the bloom itself were urging her to join him. But in that moment, Evelyn understood something profound, something that had been eluding her all along. She had been chasing a way to undo the past, a way to undo her grief, to bring back what she had lost. But the bloom was not about undoing. It was not about erasing what had been. It was about acceptance. The bloom fed on loss, on grief, on the things that could not be reclaimed. It thrived in the places where time could never heal, in the wounds that refused to close. And the moment she realized this, she understood that she could never truly escape the bloom. Not by running, not by fighting, not by wishing it away. She was part of it. Always had been. But there was still one thing left. One thing she could control. Her choice. Evelyn took a deep breath, the weight of the realization settling heavily in her chest. It wasn't about escaping. It wasn't about defying the cycle. It was about understanding it, accepting it. The past could never be reclaimed. Gabriel could never return to her as he once had been. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could change how she carried the weight of this curse. The bloom had given her power, but it had also taken something from her that could never be returned. Now, Evelyn had the choice to give something back, to make one final sacrifice, to let go. And in that letting go, perhaps she could find peace. Perhaps she could free herself from the bloom's grip, not by fighting it, but by understanding that some things had to be allowed to die. With trembling hands, Evelyn reached out to Gabriel's figure. As her fingers brushed against his, the world around her seemed to shift, as though the very fabric of existence was unraveling. The bloom's power surged through her, but this time it was different. It was no longer a suffocating force, no longer something that dragged her into the depths. This time she embraced it. She accepted the cycle, the endless dance of life and death. And in that moment, she made her choice. Evelyn released her grip on Gabriel's hand, letting go of the past, of the grief that had bound her to the bloom. She felt the weight of the curse lifting from her shoulders, the suffocating darkness receding, replaced by a strange, comforting stillness. The air around her cleared, and the fog began to dissipate, leaving behind an almost sacred silence. The souls that had once followed her now stood in the distance, their faces still, their eyes searching for something they could never find. And for the first time since she had crossed the threshold, Evelyn felt truly free. The bloom's grip on her loosened, its roots withdrawing from her chest, no longer feeding on her sorrow. She could feel its presence, faint and distant now, but it no longer controlled her. She'd let go of the grief, of the past that had held her captive, and in doing so, she had freed herself from the endless cycle. The bloom had no power over her anymore. The figure of Gabriel stood before her, no longer reaching for her. His eyes were empty, but there was no longer the same feeling of loss. There was no longer the same desperate yearning. He had been lost. To the bloom, yes, but Evelyn had found a way to transcend that loss. "You've chosen to move on," Harold said softly, standing beside her. "You've chosen to let go. And that is the only way." Evelyn nodded slowly, her heart heavy but not broken. She had given everything, and now she could walk away. The cycle would continue. Souls would be born, they would die, and they would return again. But for her, the cycle had ended. She had chosen peace, not by escaping the bloom, but by accepting it, by understanding that some things could not be reclaimed, but could be honored, and then allowed to fade. The mist around her began to thin, and the ground shifted beneath her feet. The familiar weight of the bloom's power was gone, replaced with a profound stillness that stretched outward, endless and eternal. The souls that had followed her seemed to vanish into the ether, their shapes fading like whispers on the wind. And in their place, Evelyn felt something else, a warmth, a sense of release. She was free. The bloom's final gift to her was not power nor destruction. It was release. It was peace. And in that peace, Evelyn found herself standing at the edge of the cycle, no longer its servant, but its witness. She had let go of the past, And now she could step forward into the unknown, a new soul, free of the burden she had carried for so long. The cycle had ended for her, and in its place, something new had begun.